Victor Frankenstein has just stepped into the territory of a god, stitching together human remains and giving them life, but he can't stand the sight of his own hideous creation. From here, Frankenstein's life unravels as the monster slowly takes everything he's ever loved away from him. Meanwhile, the monster himself questions his place in the world, an 8-foot-tall superhuman being who's ugly and scorned by humanity, and his creator. This all culminates in a chilling tale that's disturbing and tragic. This is Mary Shelley's frightening story seen through the lens of one of the most iconic horror authors. This is Junji Ito's Frankenstein. Hello friends, this is Grief speaking, and today I'm covering Junji Ito's Frankenstein. I recently read the original 1818 novel by Mary Shelley and thought it would be fun to do a breakdown. Since Junji Ito's version is extremely faithful to the novel, other than a few changes, I thought it was the perfect way to cover Mary Shelley's original story, but still have some creepy visuals on screen at the same time. While we will be going through the manga, I'll be pointing out major differences and details in the hopes that this will not only provide good coverage of Junji Ito's version, but at the same time give you the basic idea of what happens in the novel as well. So I hope you enjoyed this telling of the story as much as I did. This is Junji Ito's Frankenstein Explained. Before we get into the manga, I'm excited to say that this video is sponsored by Raycon, and that's because I've actually used their earbuds for years now. I own multiple pairs for different situations, and honestly, I was probably wearing them while working on this video. The everyday earbuds have become essential for me. I hate having to constantly charge electronics, so I was shocked at how long these last. 8 hours of playtime and 32 total with the charging case. They're water resistant, have easy to use button controls, and can even pair with 2 devices at once, which is great for being connected to my computer and phone at the same time. I also do a lot of writing and research for these videos, and the active noise canceling feature helps me stay completely zoned in when I'm trying to focus. On the other hand, when I need to stay aware, the awareness mode is perfect, especially when I'm out walking or doing chores. The everyday buds come in some really cool colors like royal blue, rose gold, blush violet, and mint, but I had to stick with the carbon black to match the suit. You can also pick up one of their protective cases that come in a variety of patterns, like my favorite, Galaxy. Even with all of these features, Raycons are at half the price of other premium audio brands. Right now, to celebrate Raycon's 8th anniversary, you can get 20% off the Everyday Earbuds Classic. Just go to buyraycon.com/grief, that's buyraycon.com/grief to get 20% off your own pair. So once again, big thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into Junji Ito's Frankenstein. It's a cold, rainy night, and Victor Frankenstein is hard at work performing a miracle. At long last, he's unlocked the mysteries of life, and he loudly declares that tonight he has become a god. In front of him is a large bandaged figure. Its putrid, hazy eyes begin to open. What an eerie start. Next, we see a ship traveling north through icy waters. This expedition is led by a man named Walton. Apparently, he's prepared for this trip much of his young life, and finally had the ability to pursue his dreams of traveling to the North Pole. His first mate questions whether there really is something worth finding out there, but Walton assures him, saying many believe that if you travel far enough through the ice, you'll find a land of wonders. As they speak, the boat hits a large ice patch on the sea, and Walton looks discouraged, wondering how long they'll be stuck. Just then, one of the crew members spots something out on the ice, a series of shadows passing over the whiteness. On a closer look, it appears to be dozens of dogs pulling a sled. It's strange that someone would be traveling this far from civilization, and even stranger is that of the man's stature. He seems to be the size of a giant, nearly 8 foot tall. The man disappears into the snow, leaving Walton to wonder who this man was and what he was doing. Later, as he writes a letter in his cabin, the sound of ice breaking outside raises Walton's spirits. When he ventures out to see the progress, he finds the ship's crew gathered and looking over the side. Down below is a man on a drifting mass of ice with only one dog left on his sled. Everyone agrees, though, this is not the same person they saw the day before. Below, they see the serious face of a man peering up at them. He refuses to get on the ship or to be saved until he hears that they're traveling north. In that case, he agrees to board the ship. Inside, Walton has wrapped the man in blankets and laid him near the fire to recover. At this point, he's emaciated and lacks any strength. It looks like he's been through hell, and it's surprising that he's not dead. Walton asks him what it is he seeks to accomplish in this desolate place, and the ragged man says that he seeks the one who fled from him, the demon. Curious, Walton wonders if the man he seeks is of enormous stature, and says that they saw such a man on the ice the previous day. At this point, Walton asks for his name, and of course it's none other than Victor Frankenstein. After a few days on the ship, Victor has recovered quite a bit, and though he can barely walk, obsessively looks out with a telescope, hoping to spot the monster he chases. Him and Walton have gotten on quite well. Despite Frankenstein's outward appearance and seriousness, Walton sees in his eyes the remains of a good man. Inside, Walton discusses his plans to make discoveries at the North Pole and perhaps solve the mysteries of nature. This seems to trouble Frankenstein, who believes that Walton is on the same path he once was, seeking for knowledge and wisdom. But he warns Walton the results are that of the sick and troubled man that lay before him. This prompts Frankenstein to tell Walton his story and how he got to this point, hoping he may derive some moral from it. So he begins his tale of how great his ambition was and how he lost everything. Victor Frankenstein's childhood was a happy one. His family was wealthy and lived in the beautiful countryside of Geneva, Switzerland. At age 5, his family adopted a young girl named Elizabeth. She understood Victor well and they adored each other. Along with his best friend Henry, the three grew up together happily. At a young age, Victor developed a passion for natural philosophy after finding a book by Cornelius Agrippa. His father found the book outdated and called it sad trash, which kinda made me laugh. But this didn't stop Victor from obsessively reading more, dreaming one day of discovering the Philosopher's Stone and the Elixir of Life. While authors like Agrippa and Paracelsus were seen as out of touch with modern science, these authors and their otherworldly ambitions are a fundamental part of Frankenstein's eventual discovery. When he was 15, lightning struck the tree in the Frankenstein's garden. Their dinner guest, a natural philosopher, found it to be an exhilarating experience and went on to explain the recent scientific theory of Galvani called animal electricity. This, of course, was very real and controversial at the time, as Galvani showed that the muscles of a corpse could be reanimated using electrodes. The most famous example was that of frog legs moving around without a head. Anyway, this discussion leads Frankenstein to abandon these old ideas. As he looks at the scorched tree in the garden, he declares that he's wasted his time. Around the time Victor became an adult, his mother had gotten very ill and was tended to by the family maid Justine, who everyone adored. This is actually an important detail, as Justine has a big role to play later on. Soon, Victor's mother lay on her deathbed with her final wish being that Victor and Elizabeth be married, something she apparently planned from the beginning. After the passing of his mother, Victor decided to study at university and ventured off to Ingolstadt, Germany to commence his education. It's here that the true horror begins. This is where he met Professor Waldman, a man who, instead of disregarding the old philosophers like Agrippa, actually credited them with helping to develop the modern scientific theories. This merriment of the new and old scientists ignited a spark in Victor, who decided with an enthusiastic ambition that he too will do something great, going so far as to declare that he will be stepping into the territory of a god. After this, he began to feverishly dive into his study, and his talent was soon respected by even the masters. In his singular pursuit, the university had become no longer conducive to his studies. He needed further independent research and decided he would need a cemetery for his purposes. This eerie panel of Frankenstein looking out at the gravestones is really the start of his inevitable downfall. Frankenstein enters the cemetery and after this visits the tombs almost every night to investigate the process of physical decomposition. As he looks at the rotting corpses, we get some pretty detailed panels in that gritty Junji Ito style. It's disgusting. After days of this, Victor gazes upon another corpse and says that he finally understands it. He looks up at God and says that tonight he stands alongside him. He finally discovered the secret of life. By the way, same as the novel, we never learn exactly what the secret is. In the movies, it's often harnessing the power of lightning or something like that, but here something just clicks and Frankenstein knows how to form life. After this discovery, he rents out an apartment room at the very back of the top floor, trying his best to stay away from prying eyes. One night in the cemetery, the groundskeeper hears a strange noise coming from the morgue, believing it to be some kind of ghoul. He looks inside to see a figure coming up from the darkness. It's Frankenstein, covered in blood and carrying a sack. The man falls to the ground, believing that his fears are confirmed, that it's a vampire or monster of some sort. Frankenstein leaves in a dash, and the keeper calls the authorities. They investigate the tombs to find the bodies inside mutilated and missing limbs and organs, an act that baffles them. Later, we see Victor writing in his room while body parts are strewn about the floor. He says that he can make easier progress with the work if the body is larger and predicts it to be about 8 feet tall. He says that he can't use an expired brain and instead will have to create one from nothing, a feat that's now possible with his discoveries. He's still short on some organs and will have to use animal parts to make up for it. In a montage, we see him getting to work on his new project, sewing up limbs and attempting to construct a brain. At one point, he gets something wrong and in frustration smashes the brain with his fist. Gross. Finally, he begins to stitch up some of the parts, making a massive torso, and at the same time constructing a head around his brain. Finally, on a rainy night in November, the body is fully constructed, and it's quite a sight. It's huge and covered in bandages, except for some grotesque patches of sewn flesh that are still visible. It's a dark image, making great use of Ito's drawing style. Frankenstein deems it the ultimate creation. He then connects an instrument to the creature using a set of wires, and suddenly, its eyes open. The body begins to sit up, its flesh twisting as it does, and the wrappings fall from its face. Frankenstein looks at it with horror as it slowly turns around. Life is now behind the hideous eyes of this monster. The huge creature begins to move toward Victor, making disturbing guttural noises, and next thing we know, Victor wakes up in his bed. His friend Henry has been caring for him. Apparently, he came to study in Ingolstadt and sought out Victor. However, he found him lying face down in the street outside of the apartment building. So he carried him to his bed, and Victor slept for an entire day. It seems the shock of his creation, as well as the utter exhaustion from the process, finally took its toll. Victor shoots up from bed, terrified that the monster is still in the next room, or that Henry has seen the abomination he created. Henry had entered the room the monster was in, but saw nothing but broken equipment and blood. The memory of what happened rushes back into Victor's head, how he was unable to endure the disgusting nature of the monster he had created. He had run outside in terror and fainted on the street. Realizing now that the beast had left puts him at such ease that he lets out a laugh, but shortly after faints again. From here, Victor was ill and confined to bed for 6 months, haunted by the face of the monster and hoping to God he had died, unable to survive alone in the wild. Victor finally recovers with the help of his friend Henry, who looks after him, and he feels horribly guilty for consuming all of Henry's time since he's been in Germany. Henry only asks that he write back to his family, who have been worried about him, especially Elizabeth. After reading a kind letter from her, Victor's spirits are raised. Gradually, the horrible events of that night in his apartment faded, and he resolved to study a wholly different subject from natural philosophy. Back in Switzerland, we see Victor's father, along with Elizabeth and his kid brother William, having a picnic in the nearby woods. William asks Elizabeth about a locket she keeps around her neck, and Elizabeth reveals it to contain a portrait of William and Victor's late mother. William asks if he can hold it, and as soon as he gets it in his grasp, he shouts that it's his and runs off laughing. It's all in good fun, and this turns into a game of hide and seek as Elizabeth looks for him in the woods. While William hides behind a tree looking at the locket, a large figure approaches him. He looks up to see Frankenstein's monster shrouded in a cloak and standing as tall as a tree himself. It's an intimidating sight. Back in Germany, Victor gets a letter from his father and learns that his dear brother has been murdered. At this news, he feels he has no choice but to return home to comfort his family. While he travels back to Geneva, his father and Elizabeth are in shambles over the death of the boy. As they lament, the authorities arrive and declare they've found the culprit. Shockingly, they believe Justine, the family maid, to be the killer. Apparently, the locket that William held at the time of his death was found in Justine's pocket. This is pretty damning evidence, and despite Justine's pleas, she's taken to jail to await a trial. If she's found guilty, she'll be put to death. Meanwhile, Victor arrives in his homeland and travels past the very park which William was murdered in. He stops the carriage and walks into the dark woods, falling on his knees and mourning, wondering who killed his brother. Then from the nearby bushes, a figure emerges. It's the horrifying face of the demon, watching Victor with his glossy eyes before creeping away back into the woods. Victor chases the monster to a dead end at the side of a steep mountain, but the creature begins climbing it with superhuman speed and agility, disappearing over the top. Victor arrives at his family home, still shaken from what happened in the park. His father and Elizabeth are still upset about Justine, but have no choice given the evidence but believe her to be the killer. Victor tells them they're all mistaken. He knows the true killer. Still, he can't prove this, and if he did tell them who he thought it was, he would likely look like a madman. At the trial, Justine honestly defends herself, though she can't account for the locket that she possessed, and ultimately, she's found guilty for the crime and sentenced to death. Before her execution, Victor and Elizabeth visit her, and she's surprisingly at peace, saying at least she'll be with Victor's mother and William. The time comes, and Justine is walked to the guillotine to be beheaded. Victor can't help but feel responsible for her death, as well as William's, for it was his creation that did the deed. Overwhelmed with emotions, Victor begins to walk through the wild until he finds himself on a small mountaintop. As he stares over the cliff edge, he begins to hear deep and horrible laughter, turning around to see a massive hooded figure approach. The monster pulls off his hood to reveal his horrible disfigured face. At the sight of the demon, Victor picks up a rock intended as a weapon. Surprisingly, the monster begins to speak. speak, asking Victor to hear his tale, and says that Frankenstein created him and therefore he has a responsibility as his maker to listen. Victor is still angry and replies that his only responsibility is to destroy his creation. He swings the rock at the monster, who easily evades him and grabs his arm, forcing him to drop it. As the monster does this, his cloak blows up, revealing his stitched up body underneath. He tells Frankenstein it's no use fighting and tells him to listen to him, and then, if he can or will, he can destroy the work of his own hands. With not much choice, the monster leads Frankenstein to his dwelling, a lone shack in the mountains. Inside, the monster throws a bear's arm in front of Frankenstein for eating, I guess. It's one of the craziest and scariest images in this manga, as Victor looks over to see the huge creature chewing off the face of a brown bear in gory detail. He tells Victor that thanks to his powerful body, he can even kill a bear with his hands, but at the same time, his ugliness makes people fear and loathe him. From here, he begins his tale, starting at the night that he came into being. He had no understanding of anything really, other than it was cold, so he grabbed some of Victor's clothes and wandered outside. In the novel, he goes even further, explaining how utterly confusing it was, not being able to distinguish between his senses. This was the beginning of his agony. He eventually ventured through the woods, surviving on fruit and small animals. His first run-in with humans went as you might expect. The lumbering giant just walks into a cabin while a family is eating and scares the absolute shit out of him. They run away and he starts consuming their food, but before long they come back with a mob who starts attacking him. After a few similar encounters, the creature finally saw his face in the reflection of a pool and understood that he looked different from them, and his hideous nature is what scared them. Eventually, the monster found a place to hide in a shed attached to an isolated cabin. From inside, he began to spy on the family that dwelt there, an old blind man and 2 adult children who seemed to be on hard times. Since no one seemed to ever enter the shed, the creature stayed there for quite a while. As you listen to the family, he slowly learned about language and soon began to understand them. It was clear that they had suffered some misfortune, and the creature was filled with sorrow upon seeing their grief. At night, he would collect firewood for them, as well as clearing the path when it snowed. To the family, this seemed like something from folklore, and they believed it to be the work of fairies. One day, there was a big change when a woman arrived. Apparently, this was the son's lover, and they had been separated due to unfortunate circumstances. The woman was actually from another country, and every evening, the son would teach her his language and alphabet. So the creature also took these lessons through the wall, unbeknownst to them, and he actually learned the language faster than the woman even. At this point, the monster was hit upon by a sudden burning question. What exactly is he? He's unlike humans. If God made them, then who made him? Searching through the clothing he took from Frankenstein's apartment, the monster found a journal. Inside, he learned all about his creation and the name of his maker, Victor Frankenstein. The monster's existential crisis continues as he wonders why Frankenstein would make him so ugly and cursed to be alone. He wanted a family so bad, people to sympathize with him. So he hatched a plan. He would enter the family's home while the blind old man was alone, hoping that without seeing him, he would have a chance to make friends and explain his wretched appearance. You can really see how big the monster is as he kneels down in front of the little old man. The conversation seems to go well. The creature explains how he wants to visit a kind and loving family, but is afraid that they will not accept him for he's been persecuted by many. The old man sympathizes and says that he and his family have also seen misfortune, and encourages the creature to pursue this meeting, not knowing that it's his family that the creature's talking about. The monster is overjoyed at these words and grabs the old man, telling him it's his family that he wishes to befriend. However, just then, the others show up and see what looks like a hideous creature attacking their blind father. The son pulls the monster off and begins attacking him. Although the monster could easily tear this guy limb from limb, he runs away crying, his plan foiled, and the family he grew to love now hating him. Yeah, it's pretty heartbreaking, and this story does not let up. It's a tragedy through and through. After this incident, the monster declared that he would get revenge on humanity that had made him suffer so much, and his terrible creator. From the journal, the monster learned that Frankenstein was from Geneva, and so journeyed there with revenge in his heart. Finally, when he arrived, he came upon a family in the park. He waited until the little boy was alone, and then strangled him to death. Of course, this is William, and we can see his small body drop to the ground with a sickening thud. The monster finds the locket on the boy and grabs it. He then finds a young maid sleeping in a barn and slips the locket in her apron. This is how Justine ended up with it, and it was in fact the monster that killed William. While this was a rageful act, it actually was purely coincidental. The monster finishes his tale here and says that although humanity is now his enemy, his creator alone can save him. He then puts forth a request to Frankenstein, that he make make another creature in the likeness of him, but a woman. That's right, baby, the Bride of Frankenstein. Victor's in shock at this and can't believe what he's hearing. The creature says again that he wants a woman, someone to ease his loneliness. Just as God made Adam and Eve, he believes Frankenstein has a duty to make another. Victor refuses and says that no form of torture would get him to consent to this, and that all he produced was an ugly lump of flesh. The monster replies that he may be a lump of flesh, but he's also intelligent. He tells Victor that if he refuses, he will work at his destruction and desolate his heart until he curses the day he was born. On the other hand, if he obliges this request, he will take his bride to the wilds of South Africa, where they will be isolated from humanity, never harming another soul again. Victor is still uneasy and not sure if he can take the creature at his word. After all, what if he were to make another being like this and the two of them work together to undo humanity, or worse, begin to breed and take over the earth? The creature says that with the love of a companion, hatred will be snuffed out of his heart, and he pleads with Victor, saying he needs to be saved and he's the only one who can do it. Sympathizing with the creature and not really seeing a better option, Victor finally consents to the monster's demand. The demon is overjoyed and tells Frankenstein that he will watch from afar and arrive when the woman is ready. Returning home, Victor starts to go over the logistics of his new project. Surely he couldn't do it here and would need a place far from others, a laboratory where he could start his work. The next issue is gathering materials. In Germany, he was so caught up in his ambition that he hardly was affected by the grave robbing, but now he wonders if he has the stomach for such a terrible act. While he thinks all of this over, his father approaches him with an important topic. He reminds Victor of what his mother wished for on her deathbed, and asks Victor to be honest, does he truly have feelings for Elizabeth? Victor truthfully tells his father that he is absolutely in love with Elizabeth, and she's the only woman he could ever marry. With this, his father suggests that they get married immediately then. Victor agrees, but first must complete his project, so he asks his father if it's okay that he travels to England and will marry Elizabeth when he returns. The day comes where Victor is about to depart when his friend Henry shows up to surprise him. He plans on coming along. This would be wonderful news, but instead it's a bit of a roadblock as Victor has to find a reason to get away from him to start on the bride. After they arrive in England, Victor just tells Henry he needs time alone, maybe a month or so, and that they'll meet up again afterwards. Henry is suspicious but agrees, and so Frankenstein heads out to find a laboratory. He happens upon an old and abandoned building next to a cemetery out in the country and decides it would be a perfect place. In another stroke of luck, as he arrives, he sees a funeral in session of 4 young women who were killed in a landslide. Fresh female corpses ripe for the picking to create the monster's bride. Victor digs up the graves and collects the bodies to bring them to his lab, constantly apologizing to the dead for doing so. While the bodies will work well for taking limbs and organs, the heads of the women have been crushed in the accident. It's pretty disturbing even with the bandages covering them. Even so, he begins stitching together the bride's body and once again profusely apologizing to these poor sacrifices. Soon the massive female body is almost complete and he gives it enormous breasts for some reason. I guess he's trying to throw the monster a bone or something. It's almost comical. Anyway, after working non-stop, Frankenstein is overcome with exhaustion and falls asleep where he dreams about Justine's death, and here we actually see her head get sliced off. When he wakes up, he starts trying to finish the body by putting the last arm on when Henry shows up unexpectedly and sees everything. Victor has no choice but to explain the whole story to Henry, and the dude is surprisingly chill about the whole thing. He even says he'll help Victor finish the bride, seeing that as the best possible option. Talk about a good friend. So the two continue grave robbing at night in search of a usable head for the creature. Unfortunately, they can't find any candidates. Just as they start to give up hope, the monster shows up out of the blue. The daunting figure crouches inside the lab and holds up a severed head. Apparently, he'd been watching their progress and saw that they lacked materials. So he plops down the woman's head, which he says he found in a Swiss cemetery, and he leaves. The men walk over to take a look at it and are shocked to find that it's Justine's. This enrages Victor, who accuses the monster of picking her head intentionally to torment him. It's unclear whether this is actually the case or it's just a coincidence. Henry surprisingly convinces Frankenstein that this is a good thing and could give Justine another shot at life since she was taken unjustly. Victor decides to go along with this, but like the other creature, he still must make a new brain and is worried that this monster will also become violent. Either way, they've got nothing to lose and resolve to make the bride with Justine's head and to raise her up pure and sweet. After the body is complete, they connect several instruments to it, and soon her eyes open. Immediately, Victor tells her her name is Justine and tells her that she is kind and gentle. At the same time, the monster peers in through the door with a terrifying grin. Victor helps the gigantic woman up, but as he does, she grabs some nearby scissors and stabs Victor in the arm with them. She stands up and removes the bandages from her head, revealing wild hair and stitches all around. She then lets out a blood-curdling moan, and the original monster moves in on her with a creepy smile. However, when the bride sees his face, she's horrified. Even his bride, made in the same likeness, finds him hideous. The bride then uses the scissors to slash at the monster and bares her teeth in a devilish display. The monster angrily grabs her and strangles her until the stitches all come undone and her body crumbles into a pile of parts on the floor. He turns to Victor in anger and accuses him of making the bride just to try to destroy him instead of being his companion. He declares that it is now his turn for revenge and says that Victor will lose everything he loves. He leaves, and Victor realizes what this means, that the monster intends to kill his father and Elizabeth. Victor can barely move due to his wound, but Henry takes the carriage after the creature to try and stop him. Victor struggles his way down the road until he comes upon the carriage, which is now smashed, and Henry laying dead. Victor returned home after this to, sure enough, find his father and Elizabeth slain as well. Elizabeth's death is particularly tragic as she was wearing her bridal gown in anticipation for Victor's return. As he discovers her body, he hears ominous laughter and sees the monster peering through the window with a smile, pointing at Victor's dead bride and laughing. It then takes us out of the story and back on Walton's ship, where Victor concludes his story by saying that he vowed to follow the creature to kill it or be killed by it, and that the monster intentionally has been running to the cold north in order to torture Victor. After telling this story, Victor doesn't look too hot and collapses in exhaustion. Walton heads up top and is surrounded by the men who demand that he turn the ship around. The ice is only getting worse, and some men have already died due to the cold. So Walton has no choice but to turn around lest he be responsible for more deaths. In the cabin, Walton pleads with Frankenstein to quit his revenge mission and return home with him where they can face defeat together as friends. But Victor says that the only path left for him is to destroy the monster he created. He then lets out a long sigh and goes silent. Back up top, Bosun asks Walton what will happen to Frankenstein. Will he continue alone in pursuit of the monster? Walton then informs him that Frankenstein just died a few moments ago. Just then, a loud wailing rings out from the ice. The men look over the ship to see the monster standing in the snow, crying his eyes out and screaming in despair. He somehow sensed the passing of his maker and yells out that there is no one now. He is completely alone. But soon, this suffering too shall end. Walton says that the figure slowly faded as their ship sailed away, and that is the end of Junji Ito's Frankenstein. As I said, it is an utter tragedy through and through. One of the things you may notice here is how totally different this story is from the film adaptations that brought the monster into pop culture, especially the 1931 film starring Boris Karloff as the monster. This is easily the most iconic version of Frankenstein, and I was shocked reading the book and subsequently Ito's adaptation at how different that movie is from its source material. While it shares some key moments and themes, it's almost a different story. I could do a whole video talking about the differences there, but since we're talking Junji Ito's manga version, let's focus on differences between the manga and the book. As I mentioned before, it may be the best adaptation of the story in another medium. It pretty much goes through the book beat for beat and doesn't even try to incorporate some of the later Frankenstein imagery like the crazy mad scientist lab or lightning bringing the creature to life. That being said, there are some differences from the original 1818 novel that are worth noting. Some of these I alluded to while going through the manga, but let's just run down the list. Most of the differences are actually in what was and wasn't included. The novel takes on average around 5 to 6 hours to read, and the manga takes about an hour or less. So obviously you can't squeeze every detail in. I mean, for God's sake, the book has 4 chapters just dedicated to the monster spying on the family in the cottage. For the most part, what's left out doesn't affect the story at all. A lot of it is poetic and philosophical monologues that Victor and the monster go on, which are very fascinating, but don't translate well to the comic format, which is mostly visual storytelling. One important moment that's missing from the manga, however, is the drowning girl. Funny enough, this is actually in the 1931 film. When the monster leaves the family after being attacked by the sun, he later comes upon a girl drowning drowning in a lake and saves her. Instead of getting thanks from her father, the man straight up pulls out a gun and shoots him. After this, the monster finds William and strangles him, although in the book this act is more heavily provoked. He actually tries to befriend William, but the boy won't stop insulting him, calling him a disgusting ogre. Unlike the manga, he also mentions that his father's name is Mr. Frankenstein, and upon hearing the name of his creator, who he's seeking revenge on, he chokes the kid out. Another big change that's maybe the biggest difference in this version is that in the novel, Henry never helps Frankenstein. Other than Walton, no one ever finds out what Frankenstein has done. While Henry does accompany him to England, he never checks up on Frankenstein and therefore never offers to help make the bride. The other major change has to do with the bride herself. In the novel, Frankenstein does build the body of the bride, but she doesn't have Justine's head. And more importantly, before Frankenstein even gives her life, he's overwhelmed with guilt and horror, and so he smashes the corpse to pieces himself. Of course, the monster witnesses this, and it sends him on his revenge mission to kill Victor's family. So the events shake out the same way, but the whole thing with Justine's head on the bride, that's all Junji Ito. And honestly, I kind of like it. There's some more minor differences, but they're mostly just ways of condensing the story. Like how after the events of Justine's death, the Frankenstein family take a vacation to France to try and raise their spirits, and this is where he encounters the monster on the mountaintop who had followed him there, as opposed to the manga where he simply wanders onto a mountain in Switzerland and finds the creature there. Now, we've talked about the things that were missing from the adaptation, but what about the things that were added? I already mentioned Henry and the bride, but the major addition here that feels more in line with some of the movies and also fleshes out the story in a good way is Frankenstein's grave robbing. The book surprisingly skims over him collecting the body parts, maybe because it was too shocking in the 1800s to add gory details or something, but it was cool to see Junji Ito fill in the blanks and really display the depravity of the act here in the manga. I also love the gravekeeper thinking that Frankenstein is a monster when he exits the tombs covered in blood. It plays into the classic question of who the real monster is in this story. So there you have it, folks. After watching this, you should more or less have a fairly comprehensive understanding of the original Frankenstein story, one that I think more people should definitely take the time to check out. You can buy Junji Ito's Frankenstein collection, which actually includes some bonus stories that are great, but also do yourself a favor and read Mary Shelley's original story. You can find it for free online pretty easily since it's in the public domain, and there are also a lot of really cool physical versions as well. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now. And if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends. A young girl named Alice wakes up in a white room with a number tattooed on her hand. She's guest 431 of the manor. Here you can have anything you want, as a talking serpent will grant your every wish. However, Alice is interested in getting back outside to the real world. The problem is the only way out is to pass through all 431 rooms, and the further Alice gets from her own room, the more her body will rot. Bibliomania follows Alice as she makes her way through the manor, encountering the guests and their wishes. Some are funny, some are sad, and some are very disturbing. All the while, Alice's body begins to break down from the rot. Can she make it to room 0 before her body crumbles? Or worse, will she become a victim to one of the disturbed guests and their twisted fantasies? Find out as we do a deep dive into Bibliomania. Hello friends, this is Grief speaking, and I'm excited for today's video because we're going to cover my favorite obscure manga, Bibliomania. I originally found this one on the Disturbing Manga iceberg, and it was easily one of the standouts on that whole chart. Don't worry, it's not as up as Child of God, but it does have its share of unsettling moments, mostly in the body horror department. The only thing I don't like about Bibliomania is the fact that it's not officially published in English. Yeah, the copy I have is actually in Spanish. Well, maybe if it gets a little more attention, we'll get the English version eventually. Anyway, get ready for one hell of an adventure with some shocking twists and stellar artwork. This is Bibliomania Explained. Chapter 1. Alice in Phantasmagoria. In a dense city, an explosion lights up the sky. We then see some narration that reads, "I heard a loud sound. I open my eyes. It would seem the sturdy coffin that sealed me has been broken. I'll leave this coffin and fill my body for the first time in a while. In the center of the city is a massive sphere, and it seems this is the source of the explosion. There's now a massive hole in its side that's smoking. From inside, a giant creature starts to emerge, and the people on the street are running for their lives as the voice continues saying, "I'll eat without thinking of anything. I'll eat and eat and eat." We can see a few men who've taken refuge in a building, only for huge, sinister eyes to look into the window at them. It's an eerie image, especially with the narration ending with the words, "This is my only happiness." This is followed by a beautiful title page showing ships broken to pieces in the nearby ocean and Bibliomania at the top. The letters made up of small characters that would easily fit on a deck of playing cards. These characters are actually seen later in the story, so this page is fun to go back to after you finish. After that ominous opening, it moves into the real story. A bell rings out and a voice declares that a new guest has arrived. On the floor of a completely white room sits up a girl named Alice. She looks up to see only one object in the room, a large door. She looks at her hand and sees the number 431. On the door is the number 430. The door also has a beautiful design covered in an artistic filigree. It's actually a large part of this comic style. You'll notice that some of the buildings and ships earlier had similar patterns on them. With a bemused grin on her face, Alice approaches the door. She reaches for the handle, which has the symbol of a snake on it, when suddenly a disturbing face appears behind her. He welcomes her to his manor and introduces himself as the Serpent, a fitting title as he looks like a large snake with arms and wears a suit. He says it's been a while since he's had a guest and seems delighted at Alice's arrival. He snaps his fingers and summons an armchair out of thin air for Alice to sit in. Then he tells her to wait in this room until the party begins. He says there's going to be a wondrous banquet, but it'll take a little time to prepare. As he speaks, strange symbols can be seen forming behind his teeth, and he tells Alice that as long as she's in this room, she can have anything she desires. Alice's belly rumbles, and to demonstrate what he means, the Serpent snaps his fingers and giant strawberries begin raining from the sky. At the same time, massive cakes grow out of the ground like a dessert paradise. The Serpent tells her not to leave the room and disappears. It then cuts back to the destroyed city, and we see the words Alice, 5 days until entry, at the top. We can see Alice unfazed walking through the empty streets until she comes upon a small doll. She picks it up and its arm falls off. Suddenly she catches a familiar smell in the air and begins following her nose. Behind her, the doll lay on the street with a butterfly resting on it. Okay, so maybe this is before Alice entered the Serpent's manor. Back in room 431, Alice has had her fill of desserts. In fact, the giant plates are basically empty, so she really went to town, I guess. Well, out of boredom, I guess, she once again approaches the door to room 431. She opens it up and begins to walk through when she feels a sharp pain on her hand. Her skin looks like it's rotting or something, and as she investigates, the Serpent appears screaming at her and pulls her back into her own room. He tells her that if she leaves, her body will begin to rot, and the further she gets, the worse the effects are. He goes on to explain more about the manor, how there are 431 guests and 431 rooms. For every new occupant, a new room is added, and that's how it's always been since the beginning, a long time ago. He says that one day when room 666 is added, the manor will be complete, and they can all celebrate with a big party. He adds that any guest attending the party will not be able to leave the manor for all of eternity. He considers this a good thing since here you can have literally anything you can imagine. It's so much better than the outside world, which is full of suffering and conflict. Alice furrows her brow and says there are good things out there too, you know. She then throws a quick tantrum saying she doesn't want to go to the party, she wants to go home. It almost seems like the Serpent looks right at us and calls her a silly girl. He informs her that there is one way to leave. If you wish to return to the outside world, you'll have to get to the very first room to be made in the manor, room 000. Alice immediately jumps towards the door before the Serpent can finish. He grabs her by the collar and continues, saying that in order to get there, she would have to make her way through all 430 rooms, which is a problem because, as he mentioned, the further she gets from her room, the more her body will rot. But here, she'll be just fine, and as proof, Alice looks at her hand to find that it's healed back to normal. By the time she would make it to the exit, however, the rot would consume her entire body and she would die. As the Serpent continues his warnings, Alice slowly sneaks off toward the door once again and simply says, "I guess that means I gotta hurry." She opens the door and the Serpent tells her point point blank that she'll regret this. It then cuts back to the broken city once again, this time saying 4 days until entry. Alice casually walks through the wreckage with a smile, sniffing the air to find the source of the smell. Eventually, she stands on a massive gun near the beach and declares that she's found what the smell is. The gun here is really interesting and suggests that this is either a futuristic or alternate world because of the difference in technology. There's something about the design that kind of reminds me of Full Metal Alchemist. But let's move into Chapter 2, The Trials of Room 430. Back in the manor, Alice steps into room 430. Her hand immediately begins rotting, but she pays it no mind and actually sings a cheery nursery rhyme as she walks. She finds herself in the middle of a town in feudal Japan, and a voice rings out saying that the court is now in session. A giant mechanical samurai comes out and sits at the top of some steps, asking for the sinner to come forth. Luckily, he's not referring to Alice, but an unfortunate teen in a school uniform whose head is covered by a large block. Two mechanical men bring him before the giant and tell him to confess his sins. The blockhead admits that he bullied a classmate and drove him to suicide. Whoa. Well, the samurai judge follows up by asking, why did you abuse him? Surprisingly, the teen on trial admits that he did it because it was fun, even saying that his victim was a pussy bitch. We get a glimpse of the bullying, although in this flashback, the student still has the block on his head. He's forced his classmate to strip to his underwear, and this sicko sits on him like a human chair. It's actually worse than that. He puts a bottle under the kid's forehead for support, which must hurt like hell. Eventually, his victim can't support his head any longer, and the weight breaks the bottle, making them both topple over. The bully is pissed and says that he had no right to stop being a chair. After some physical abuse, the bully pulls his phone out to get a photo of his victim, laughing the whole time. Damn, this got really dark. The judge asks if it was really that fun, and before the guy can answer, the mechanical men cut off his head. This happens so quickly it actually surprised me. Alice, as usual, is unfazed, just watching this unfold with curiosity. The serpent shows up and says that this is no place for children and yanks her up with his coiled tail. The judge then has the next sinner come to trial, and it seems like it's the same guy. The serpent tells Alice that ever since this guest came to the manor, he's been killing the same person over and over again. Just then, the block-headed bully is beheaded once more. It's become clear now that the samurai is the bullied student, and he rages out, screaming that he's not a chair while beheading his tormentor over and over again. Apparently, he's done this for years, and we can see him raging out at the bully, saying, "How about you be my chair, asshole?" From further away, we can now see that the thousands of heads he's chopped off have formed a sort of chair under him. It's a great revenge tale, except for the fact that it sounds like a miserable existence living in bitterness for all of eternity like this. The mechanical swordsmen around are laughing maniacally and look pretty disturbing. The samurai not only judges his bully, but everyone else who sat there and watched doing nothing. In the end, he wants to kill everyone, making this area a lot less safe for Alice. Just as the mechanical men slash at Alice with their swords, the serpent grabs her again, yanking her to safety. Behind them, there's a pretty wild panel of the samurai slashing up hundreds of victims and crying out that it'll never be enough for his chair. At this point, it's clear that Alice needs to leave, so she presses on to the next room. Chapter 3, The Bird of 413 and the Hero of 385. In the past, Alice, now 3 days from entry, jumps from the massive gun and to the rocky beach below without taking any fall damage. She continues sniffing and says, "It's close." Alice walks through another door and finds herself falling upward into the sky, eventually landing on something soft above. The serpent appears and tells her that the occupant of this room wished to become a bird, and we can see that Alice landed on the bird's back. It's huge and has a human face, which is kind of creepy, but beautiful at the same time. This guest wanted to be free from the meaningless borders drawn across the ground and to be free of the conflicts of man. So she became a bird, soaring through the sky and forgetting she was ever human. The serpent asks Alice if she truly wishes to return to the outside world, and she answers with a smile, "You bet." At this point, her arm is pretty unsightly, rotted into a twisted, mutated mess. As the bird continues flying through the heavens, the serpent reveals that he himself has never seen reality. The system forbids him from leaving the manor, but listening to his guests has made him think. For a human to leave this place is to let go of great happiness. Alice says that that may be true, but she doesn't want a world built on her own lies. Instead, she'd rather experience the itty-bitty happiness of the real world. The great bird flies past a moon, atop of which sits the next door. Alice jumps off towards it, declaring that she hates lies. She waves goodbye to the bird and the serpent and enters the next room. Alice, 2 days until entry, walks along the beach. In the water are many more large guns, some twisted and broken. She continues searching among the wreckage along the coast for whatever it is she wants, and it cuts back to the manor. It's clear that we aren't going to see every room of the manor, as Alice is now at room 385. It makes sense though, this would be the longest manga ever if that were the case. As she enters, we get another glimpse of her rotted arm, and it now has bits of feathers sticking out of it. It's almost like it's been taking on some of the other guests' characteristics. It's also now up to her shoulder. Alice takes 2 steps into the room when a huge alien monster lands right next to her. She just grins at it, not concerned at all, and it goes in for the kill. Just before it smashes her face in, a person moves in with amazing speed to save her. He is a superhero with a metallic exosuit. Kinda looks like Ida from My Hero Academia. He talks all dramatic, calling the alien an evildoer, then introduces himself as Space Mobile Suit Prince Ericrom. After this theatrical moment, he looks over at Alice, who clearly doesn't know who he is. The alien leaps at him, but Ericrom pauses it like a video game and turns back to Alice, still shocked that she hasn't heard of him. He explains that he's from a best-selling comic book. He unpauses the creature and turns around to slash it in half with his energy sword. Nearby, a giant slug creature opens up its sides to reveal more aliens, and it launches them out like pods. It's actually some cool creature design here, a mashup of biology and technology. Anyway, the aliens surround Alice and the hero, and strangely enough, they're yelling things at him like work and get married. Ericrom does a super move, rapidly slashing around and exterminating them in a flash. As soon as he does, a bunch of hot bikini babes come running out to surround him. Alice is just casually watching this whole thing and calls it cliche. Suddenly, a massive alien creature shows up like a boss fight, saying he's going to reduce the galaxy to dust. Ericrom decides to take on such a foe, he'll need to do a suit swap, and for a brief moment, we see who he really is, a severely overweight balding man in his underwear. This is the guest of 385, and it's obvious what his wish is. He changes into a suit with a blaster cannon, looking cool as ever, when Alice says, "You're not exactly young, are you?" Her speech bubble strikes him through the chest and hits him for 999 damage. Okay, now that's funny. The giant alien mocks him, saying he can't even handle the words of a little girl, and then calls the hero his pathetic son, saying, "Leave your room, do some work, get married." And we can see a glimpse of what the guest's life was like in the real world. Him sitting in front of a computer monitor surrounded by Ericrom figures and posters. He yells out at the alien, a representation of his father, demanding that he respect him. They battle it out, and Ericrom deals the final blow, destroying the beast. In the rubble, Alice spots the door to the next room. A ton of bikini babes come running out to surround the hero and kiss him, and Alice gives him an uneasy look before leaving. I love this chapter because of how it slips into being a comedy for a few minutes, even though ultimately the guest's backstory is still pretty sad. Chapter 4, the dining table of room 285. We cut back to Alice 1 day until entry, and she's still searching the beach. She looks into a huge destroyed tank and seems to find something. It looks like a book that's been chained shut. She sniffs it and says it smells like her little brother. Then walking back toward the destroyed city, she says, "Let's go home." In the manor, we get a montage of various rooms as Alice makes her way through. Room 366 has a guest smoking multiple cigars at once with smoke coming out of his eyes. 359 is full of instruments and music, and in 339, the guest has made himself a tree and become one with nature. As she continues to travel, we can see the rot growing across Alice's body, now reaching the back of her head. Room 330 seems to be a massive orgy. In 324, the guest is traveling the universe as a spaceman. In room 298, the guest has made himself a huge baby playing with toys, and the guest of 306 has made himself immensely rich. Alice enters room 285 and mentions that her body is heavy as lead on account of the rot spreading so badly. It's actually one of the most disturbing moments so far. The rot on the back of her head produces the full snout of a dog. It pokes out from her hair and breathes heavily. It's really off-putting. This room is the most normal that she's entered. It appears to be just a house. Eventually, she comes upon the dining room where she sees a family eating dinner. A husband, his wife, and their son. They question who Alice is, and she tells them she's heading for the outside world. She asks if they'd like to come with her, and the father is immediately enraged. He yells at her for barging into his house and calls her a brat. The serpent appears and points out how bad the rot has taken over her body, calling it desire poison. He also says that this guest would never accept her offer to leave. In the real world, he was a teacher, teaching logic and ethics to children. Ironically, his family was far from the ideal that he he taught. His wife was distant and his child was a total brat. This contradiction between his doctrine and reality crushed him. We can see a creepy image of his students pointing at him and questioning his own ethics. This drove the man to drinking, and he fell victim to the curse of time. In a sort of symbolic retaliation, the man picks up a clock and throws it into an hourglass, shattering it and sending gears, bolts, and sand onto the floor. In room 285, the man now serves up plates of the sand and clock parts to his family for dinner. It's really bizarre and quite unsettling, but in this place without time, he'll never grow old, his family will never leave him, and they are perfect in every way, in line with his own brand of ethics. Here, he can have a perfect life. Even so, the man chews on the clock pieces, making horrible noises, and Alice questions if this can really be called life. Even more disturbing, some of the metal pieces pierce through the father's cheeks and blood runs down his face. Alice moves on through the next door. Chapter 5, The Bog of 276. In another flashback, Alice, now 10 seconds before entry, sits on her bed and breaks open the locks around the book. Its covers bear resemblance to the doors in the manor, and she begins to open it. When she does, it floats into the air and all the pages flutter. The seconds count down, and before you know it, Alice is sucked into the book. This seems to confirm that the manor is actually this book, and these flashbacks were leading up to Alice appearing in room 431. Inside, she's not looking too hot. The rot is now moving onto her face, and she's walking slowly through room 276, which is covered in thorny roses. The occupant in this room is a beautiful woman who continually stares at herself in the mirror. She asks Alice why she insists on returning to the real world when there is nothing there but pain. Alice tries to argue with her, but the woman cuts her off and asks her if she knows what it's like to fear death every night. She compares it to drowning in a bog. Here, she can remain beautiful forever. Alice asks her if she had a family. Was no one there for her? This really sets the woman off, and she yells at Alice to quit her nonsense. Her face has rapidly changed to that of a decrepit old woman, and thorns grow out of her face. In reality, this woman feared death, and aging horribly, was kept in a hospital waiting to die. Her family disdained her for having to foot the medical bills. She eventually escaped the hospital and wandered into the woods, planning to hang herself. However, as she puts the rope around her neck, she looks over and sees the book. As she explains this to Alice, the thorns on the roses begin to cut her and fill the room with blood to the point that it's waist deep. The woman says in this room she can live forever and reveals her face to be nothing but a skull now. Alice is silent and turns towards the door, wading through the blood. The skull-faced woman laughs ominously as Alice exits to the next room. Outside, we can see the book sitting on Alice's bed, and up above, a hole in the ceiling that looks exactly like the one made in the giant sphere from the beginning of the comic. In a slow zoom out, it's revealed that the bed rests on top of thousands of objects and artifacts from all across history, like a bizarre collection of everything that's ever existed. At the bottom, dozens of people are tied up and blindfolded, screaming for help. What the hell is happening here? Chapter 6, The Tombstone of 268 and the Researcher of 255. Breathing heavily, Alice makes her way through the manor. At this point, almost her entire body is rotting and transformed as she steps into room 268. It consists of hundreds of paper strips with symbols on them, like ribbons of information. The serpent stands inside as if waiting for her. He tells her that this room's occupant was like her and sought to reach room 0, or more accurately, page 0. He reaches out his arms and says that this is all that remains of him, waves of information in a sea of data. His soul became words after his body crumbled, and now they reside here. There's a beautifully disturbing image of Alice, half of her face now rotted with tentacles growing out of it. It's a really gorgeous panel. The serpent once again warns her that if she proceeds, she'll end up like this. However, Alice says nothing and continues to the next door. The serpent ponders what drives her. What is it that she wants in the outside world? She leaves, and he calls her foolish, saying that she has no idea that room 0 was never made to be reachable. He gets pissed off, impatiently waiting for the book to reach page 666 and having to fulfill these ridiculous wishes for humans. He ends by saying something kind of ominous. I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice. It cuts back to the people who are tied up outside, and they start screaming that it's coming back. The beast has come. Alice wakes up in room 255, and curiously, she's completely back to normal without any rot. She finds herself in a large glass chamber like a test tube. Soon, a creepy-ass scientist peers in at her and presses a button which sends her through a long series of tubes before spitting her out. The scientist tells Alice that thanks to her, he's got some great data now. Several more similar-looking scientists surround her, and he says that he cloned himself in order to analyze the book from every possible angle. So I guess these aren't other scientists scientists, but rather odd-shaped clones. We get a zoom out of the lab, which is massive and complicated, but there's a lot of data to process after all. The scientists say they found her at the entrance, collapsed and ready to die, but he injected her with a drug that he developed that suppresses the rot, although it only works once. They all laugh creepily while staring at her, and then the scientist says he'll explain the secret of the book that they're all in. Weirdly enough, the top of one of the clones' heads pops off and his brain jumps out with arms and legs, and it runs around like a dog playing with Alice. Weird, but cute. It rests on Alice's head and its eyes project a screen on the wall. The scientist uses this like a PowerPoint presentation and says that once the manor, or book, reaches 666 people, it will bind all of their flesh and souls together, merging into a being of great power. This is the party the serpent speaks of. For every wish that's granted, the occupants become more insane and they grow further away from their neighbors and the outside world. It makes them stay in their rooms and rots away their desire to escape. The scientist pulls down his eyelid to show the room number on his eye. Every occupant has this somewhere on their body. He goes on to explain that the book also has a system in place that makes reaching page 0 impossible. The book is designed so that the lower the page number, the faster the body rots. Those in rooms below 100 can't even enter their neighbors' rooms without crumbling completely. All the scientists bunch up together in a creepy panel and laugh, telling Alice that she'll never make it to page 0, and warn her not to go any further. Alice just smiles and asks them a question. How can they tell which scientist was the original? All at once they answer, "Me of course," and point to themselves, which sends them all into a furious argument and they start fighting over who's the original. As they do, Alice keeps on smiling and walks into the next room. Chapter 7, Run Towards Death. We get another montage of the rooms that Alice is running through, although the guests and their wishes have become completely unhinged and disturbing. The further she goes down, the longer the guests have been there, which has slowly made them go insane. And their wishes are a body horror nightmare, as they twist into deformed shapes. At the same time, Alice's body has begun rotting away again at a much faster pace this time. In fact, the rot has completely covered her body and turns her into something of a body horror exhibit of her own. In one of the standout panels of the manga, we see her running full blast while her face has taken a twisted and grotesque form. Once again, the art here is stellar. The serpent appears and wonders if the maddening pain has crushed her mind yet. She just leaps over him and runs to the next door, rapidly passing through the rooms while her body becomes less and less human. Eventually, she gets to room 100, remembering what the scientist said about those that travel to the pages below. Still, she enters room 99, and immediately her body rots severely and starts to crumble, collapsing to the ground like a broken husk. The serpent arrives and declares her dead before laughing maniacally. He gleefully says that this is the result of those who seek to escape. You'll only die and turn into words. However, as he goes on his "I told you so" rant, Alice seems to move, and out from her deformed shell of a body, her human fingers poke through. Alice then stands up out of the crumbled shell like a cicada shedding its skin, and she fully emerges looking completely fine. Chapter 8, Guests. Back to her normal self, she looks up at the serpent with her big eyes and begins walking forward. The serpent is stunned and can't make any sense of it. Alice simply smiles as she passes him and then breaks into a full sprint towards the next room. As soon as she gets through the door, her body instantly rots into another broken shell, but Alice simply leaps out from the shell, once again fully renewed. The serpent watches in shock as Alice moves with beast-like speed through the rooms, constantly rotting and reviving over and over. He tries to understand it. Is this a system error? Does she somehow possess an immortal body? Whatever it is, he says he can sense the candle of her life going out. There's no question that she's dying hundreds of times over. Finally, Alice reaches the final door, to room 000. As she walks into the room, she steps out of another dead husk, renewed again. In the room is another door with a magnificent structure around it. The serpent says that this is the table of contents, and he demands Alice tell him how it's possible that she got here. Alice starts to walk towards the final door, and at the same time she speaks, saying, "Once upon a time, in a certain island country." The serpent interrupts her and she just smiles at him, saying, "We'll continue this later." And then she enters the last door. As she walks through, the number 431 dissolves from her hand and she disappears. From the doorway, strange symbols appear like that of what we saw in the serpent's mouth before. Up above are hundreds of lights representing the many rooms. The ones with occupants are lit up. Of course, room 431 goes out. As the serpent rages out over Alice, the light of room 431 suddenly lights back back up. Could it be Alice? Did she somehow return? Then the remaining rooms rapidly begin to fill, and all the lights are blinking on until finally all the rooms up to 666 are occupied. The serpent is shocked and elated at what he's seeing. The manor is now full, and the serpent's eyes shine white. Chapter 9, Banquet. The long wait is over at last, and massive cables with symbols on them burst from the structure and into the serpent as he screams out that the party has begun. He seems to take on a more sinister shape as the cables fill his body with, I'm not sure what. The serpent disappears onto the floor and arrives at room 666. The guest has just arrived and stands up in surprise as the demented serpent lunges at him, devouring the man whole. After doing so, the serpent grows more arms and moves to the next room to consume another meal. He travels rapidly through the rooms, eating their occupants, the new arrivals as well as some familiar faces from the rooms that Alice visited, like the bullied student. In the outside world, the book still sits upon Alice's bed and it begins to glow with sparks shooting out. It floats into the air, fluttering violently, and the guests of the many rooms can feel the effects, including the scientist, and he realizes that the feast has begun and that the serpent is arriving. As he and his clones are sucked into the great beast's mouth, he says, "O serpent, enjoy reality to your heart's content," as if he knows something that the serpent doesn't. The serpent continues onward after consuming every guest and jumps through the door in room 0. In the outside world, we can see the serpent's twisted form manifesting into reality from the book. It is a hell of a sight, like a Dali painting mixed with Junji Ito. Now a massive beast, he bursts through the dome in the city, emerging as basically a kaiju. Chapter 10, Remembrance. The serpent, now a towering monstrosity, sees his reflection in a nearby building and is pleased to finally enter the real world. He starts crushing buildings just for the thrill of interacting with something real, I suppose. And then he notices that nobody is here and he's alone. In a sort of rage, he conjures up an energy blast, ripping the city up even more, and demands that the humans come out to worship him. Then from nearby, he can hear someone singing a nursery rhyme. A young girl appears atop a crumbled skyscraper, and it is none other than Alice, and it looks like she's ready to tell the serpent the rest of her story. Once upon a time in a certain island country, there lived a unforgetful princess. The girl was terribly ill and couldn't go outside, so instead she read. Possibly because of her strange illness or because she was born with it, she had a peculiar memory. Once she'd seen or read something, she would never forget it, like an extreme photographic memory. Because of this, she could absorb information at a blinding speed. She had books ordered from all over the world and of every genre until she had a library full of them and became obsessed with knowledge. She wanted to know as much as possible about the world that she couldn't see with her own eyes. She wanted to know everything, the whole truth of the world. Eventually, she made plans to create the book to end all books. Here we see the construction of some bizarre and enormous device that seems to be channeling energy into the book, and the princess named this book that contained all knowledge the Book of Truth. We can see her reach out and grab the book, which begins to transform her into a giant hideous beast. She immediately begins turning the servants into words and consuming them. The book automatically transcribes all human memories and emotions, and so the princess and the book were now one, turning humans into knowledge and storing them within herself. Now we know what all the massive guns were for, as the humans attempt to fight off this monstrosity that was laying waste to the population. They built a massive gun that could shoot biblioclastic rounds imbued with concentrated magic, using ribbons of knowledge to seal the beast in a large tomb. The very same sphere that was cracked open at the beginning, and if you hadn't pieced it together, Alice is the princess and she was the beast sealed within the sphere. I would have never expected the manga to go this route, but man, I love the world building here. Plus, biblioclastic ammunition is such a wild and creative concept. Chapter 11, The Great War. The war against the princess had ended and the people celebrated. As the years passed, the population grew and a city was built around the prison. As time went on, so did technology, and using the princess's research notes, scientists were able to create their own copies of the Book of Truth with lower page counts to be used in war. Here we can see a creature that looks like the serpent being fused into the book, and looking at its cover, it's clear that this is the very one that the serpent emerged from. Despite making copies, these were inferior knockoffs that couldn't even decipher words that they'd eaten, but they were powerful enough to be useful for the human army, until their research facility was bombed, burning up most of the books. A few lucky copies survived and were scattered across the globe. Time passed again, and soon the humans forgot about the Book of Truth that they had put to sleep. Then, nearly 150 years after the Great War had ended, the Book of Truth opened up once again. We can see the sphere crack open, and an obscured monster break free and start consuming humans after turning them into words. The public freaks out and tries to figure out what's going on, but the internet is flooded with bad information and theories, making it hard to know what to believe or who to trust. As Alice tells the story, she laughs about how, in the end, they're the same as her, looking for information in order to live. There's a great 2-page spread of Alice in a massive Cthulhu-like form destroying the city. With no other option, the human military recycled some of the biblioclastic rounds from a bygone era and fired them once again at the beast. However, this time it did nothing to the book, who had already eaten plenty, and so the second war ended with the book gaining victory. In the present, Alice explains how she got so many people to enter the manor so quickly. She says that she just forcefully showed the serpent to her food. We get a glimpse once again to all the people tied up at the bottom of the sphere, and can see Alice showing them the serpent book, which absorbs them. Because she used up so many of these people, she had to get more food elsewhere, which is why the city is empty. The serpent silently stares at her, and she asks him, "Did you really think you were the only book? Did you think you were special?" The serpent starts raging out, screaming for her to stop. It slashes at her with its massive tail, but she just laughs and casually jumps out of the way. Then she transforms into a creature herself. Her shadow dwarfs the serpent, and when we finally get a look at her, she can only be described as glorious. 10 times bigger than the serpent, she still looks like Alice, but in an adult form, and also resembles that of a butterfly. It's a very cool design. Chapter 12. Sunset. Alice says she was aware of the serpent's existence, and she entered knowingly because she wanted to see what was inside her worthless little brother, and nothing more. She starts laughing at him, and he runs away while the towering Alice walks slowly behind him. She then says, "Let's review." A book with far more than 666 pages was made, a book incomparably greater. As Alice speaks, she transforms into the Lovecraftian monstrosity once again, and with her mouth splitting open to reveal jagged teeth, she says that this book consumes souls even now, adding more pages to it. The serpent falls to the ground as the all-powerful Book of Truth closes in on him with her many arms, ultimately trying to absorb him along with all the information within. The serpent cries out in agony, but Alice says to rejoice, he will live on in her records. Finally, the serpent's belly bursts open and all the information within him, including the guests, come flowing out. In a beautiful few panels, the souls of all the characters we met along the journey turn into words, as Alice takes them in, saying she won't forget even the tiniest, most insignificant wavering of the serpent's heart. With his last breath, he asks her, what good will recording all this information be if all life ceases to exist? She admits that it's most likely meaningless, but she has to. The serpent is stripped of almost everything, and only a skeleton remains. Alice finishes by saying that this is her only happiness. She finishes absorbing the serpent and turns back into a little girl looking over the destroyed city as the sun sets. She says she has to consume the souls of man, adding more words, although there's no one left to read them now. We get a glimpse of the doll in the empty street with the butterfly on it, and that is the end of Bibliomania. Yeah, this was a wild ride, and while it's not as surreal or interpretive as something like Spa, it does get pretty complicated by the end and can be unclear exactly what's going on. So first I'll break down what actually happened here in chronological order, and then we can talk about theories and possible themes behind Bibliomania. So let's break it down. Alice was originally a sick girl whose illness left her unable to venture to the outside world, so instead she learned about it by reading. Due to an almost supernatural ability to absorb information, she sought to make the ultimate book that held all possible information, and using the technology and magic of her world, crafted the Book of Truth. She fused with the book and began to absorb people and all of their knowledge, quickly growing into a godlike entity, consuming millions of people until the military crafted a weapon that could at least keep her at bay and locked her in a massive sphere-like prison. After hundreds of years of slumber in this prison, she eventually broke free and began terrorizing the population once more. Only this time, she won the battle and essentially consumed every human. While she was dormant, the humans used her research to make copies of the Book of Truth to use as weapons of war. But in an attack, they were all burned except for a few copies. One of these surviving books was the Serpent. Alice searched the city until she found this copy and willingly entered it, appearing in room 431 and making her way through the book out of curiosity in her quest for knowledge. As essentially an immortal being, she beat the system and survived long enough enough to look through every room of the Serpent's Manor and leave out of room 0. On the outside, she used the Serpent's book to absorb her captive humans, filling the remaining pages and completing it. With this, the Serpent consumed the souls of the manor and emerged into the real world as a godlike being himself. However, he was an inferior copy. Alice easily defeated him, and ever hungry for knowledge, she then consumed the newly transformed being and all of the guests inside. It seems that Alice only allowed him to transform out of curiosity, and by completing the book, she could gain new information. However, she's now left with an almost empty world and no one left to read the Book of Truth. That about sums it up. It's actually still unclear whether she consumed the entire world's population or just this city, and on top of that, the Serpent's book wasn't the only one to survive. It mentions that the others were scattered around the world. So I imagine next, Alice will track down these other copies, or as she calls them, her little brothers and sisters, and do the same thing to them as she did to the Serpent, allowing them to transform before absorbing them. I could easily imagine a sequel where Alice tracks down the other books, or even better, an anthology series that focuses on some of the rooms we never got to see in the manor. There's a lot of possibilities there, so I really hope this manga gains more popularity online. Now let's talk about some of the themes and meaning behind this book. I can't find the author themselves explaining what it's really about, but I kind of prefer that because it makes it more open to interpretation. Probably the most common takeaway from readers seems to be escapism and the theme of desire versus reality. In the manor, the guests can have anything they wish for, but they often become fixated on the troubles of their past lives in the real world. While they use their wishes to make perfect realities for themselves, these wishes keep them stuck wallowing in bitterness, envy, and revenge. In the real world, we're forced to work through problems in order to move forward in life, but ironically, the manor's guests seem to never conquer their demons. Instead, they create realities focused around them. Another major theme is obsession with knowledge. This is sort of where the title comes into play. Bibliomania is the excessive collecting or even hoarding of books to the point where social relations or health are damaged. Alice was obsessed with seeing the outside world, and her only outlet was reading about it. Eventually, she does see it, but ironically becomes a monster in the process. Instead of experiencing the real world, she instead analyzes it through words, and by doing so destroys the very thing she wanted to experience so badly. To me, this is a warning about the limits of knowledge and its contrast with actually living. There's a great quote by E.B. White: "Explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. You understand it better, but the frog dies in the process." Now, obviously this quote is about humor, but I often relate it to life itself. For instance, you can read everything there is to know about a dog by reading books, but none of that knowledge will let you experience what it's like to play fetch or rub a dog's belly. Finally, I think there's an interesting analogy in Bibliomania regarding technology and the internet. When Alice emerges in the modern day and starts wreaking havoc, no one knows what's true or what to do because of the overload of online information. This is obviously a real problem as information gets harder and harder to verify, especially when you throw AI into the mix. What's interesting is that Bibliomania was originally published in 2016 from what I can tell, but this sequence of people panicking online eerily mirrors the breakdown of information that happened in 2020 and after, somewhat predicting the dangers of too much information. Anyway, I could dissect this book to death, but I'm curious what you guys think. What did you get out of it? Let me know in the comments. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now. And if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grease speaking. Goodbye, friends. Hello friends, this is Grease speaking, and today we're gonna wrap up Grimmeryland. If you missed the first part, I'll put a link below so you can go check that out. Man, I gotta say, I hadn't quite finished Grimmeryland when I decided to make the first part. I just thought this is a fun, haunted theme park story that's got some slasher vibes, and I would have never guessed the way this story goes. It completely surprised me, and if you don't know what happens, you'll be surprised as well. It's easily one of the most what the f endings to a comic I've covered so far. Some of you will find it interesting, some of you will hate it, but either way, you're gonna be shocked. I've actually had a lot of people telling me I should cover another comic by the author called Melvina's Therapy that's a fan favorite, so if you'd like me to cover that next, let me know in the comments below. That being said, we have a lot of questions that need answers, so let's get into Grimmeryland Part 2 Explained. Season 2 kicks off with Eva's mom looking out the window on a rainy night and contemplating the case. The group's been missing for weeks now, and there's not much of a lead. She feels like somehow this is all connected to Eva's death and believes it was no accident. Next, we see a new group of friends showing up to Grimmeryland. It's hard to tell if this is taking place before or after the events of Season 1. Anyway, the group consists of 3 friends, Godric, Ray, Paul, and Paul's little sister, Judy. You may recognize Godric and Ray as Jax's friends who would often bully Raimi. They're clearly a little annoyed that Paul dragged his little sister along, and it seems that she has some kind of mental disability. She's also dressed like Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz for some reason, and her name, Judy, is a direct reference to Judy Garland. They enter the park and find an information booth with some maps. They're unsure where to go first until Judy suggests an attraction called Witch Island. So following the map, they head that way, and they actually pass the park exit that Bruno ran through at the end of last season, but it's barred up here. They also see red X's all over the trees. Eventually they find a dock and a boat with a hooded figure in it. Seems like it's modeled after the river Styx. They're a little creeped out, but this is all part of the fun, right? They jump into the boat and are ready to be ferried across to Witch Island. As they cross the foggy water, skulls can be seen floating around the boat. They make it across without any issues and find another wooded area past the dock with a sign. It states that a witch has taken over the island, and since her arrival, it's been covered in darkness and the smell of death. If you wish to enter, know that the Yellow Road is the only safe place, and under no circumstances should you step off the path. They look over to see an actual yellow brick road, furthering the connection to the Wizard of Oz. So they set off down the road and seem to be walking for quite a while when suddenly a loud animalistic noise echoes through the woods. Ray suggests that it's part of the attraction and thinks maybe they should follow the sounds. Judy warns them that they're supposed to stay on the road, but Paul reassures her that it's just a theme park, and so they all venture off the path. The noise is getting closer, and they finally spot the source, a giant stag. But something is off about it. The creature turns its head, and we can see it has a strange fungal growth covering its face and eating into its eye. Its antlers are covered in blood, and its remaining eye is blacked out. The group screams at the sight of it, and the stag immediately cries out and begins chasing them. They make it back to the yellow brick road, and the stag comes charging full tilt toward them. However, just before hitting the yellow bricks, it stops. There's a freaky moment where the large creature stares at them. It makes the hideous noise once again, and then it wanders away back into the forest. I guess the sign was right. The yellow road really is safe. They're relieved for a moment until they look around and realize that Ray is missing. They call out to him but get no reply. Godric says they should just ignore him and that he's probably hiding somewhere to try and scare them. So they keep walking and assume they'll find him later. As they continue on the path, they begin to hear another noise. This time it's a human scream, and it sounds a little too real. In case it's Ray and he needs help, they decide they should go find the source, but it's gonna require them leaving the path again. After a short argument, Paul convinces Godric to go so that he can stay with his little sister. Godric storms into the woods, loudly saying Paul should have left Judy at home. Using his phone as a flashlight, he creeps further into the dark forest, eventually stumbling upon a dead rabbit that's infested with the strange fungus. Next, he smells a foul odor and stumbles upon another corpse of a rotted boar. Finally, he looks over to see Ray standing with his face to a tree. Godric slowly approaches him, assuming this is some kind of prank, but when Ray turns around, he has the fungus growing out of his eyes and mouth. It's a terrifying sight for sure. Godric screams and books it back to the yellow road, only to find that Ray is waiting there with the others and he's perfectly fine. He says that he was gonna try and scare them, but after Godric wandered off, it lost its appeal. Godric thinks this is all a big joke on him and that he definitely saw Ray in those woods. He decides he's ready to go home and starts going back the way they came. The thing is, the path ends abruptly, as if it somehow disappeared, and sitting at the end of the road is a witch's broomstick. They convince themselves that it's just a trick, and they already came all this way, so they keep moving forward. At the end of the road, they find an old house. They start to head in when Judy says she needs to pee. So Paul tells the others to go on ahead while they they hang back. I guess so she can pop a squat in the woods? I don't know. Inside, Ray and Godric find a full-size straw man sitting in a chair and a note left on the table. It mentions the strange cancer that's killing all of the animals and how the forest is no longer safe. The note then says that a crazy old woman appeared on the island and began taunting the author, calling him her straw man and saying, "When nobody sees you, I will control you." He says that last night he thinks he saw the woman wandering around his house. They finish the note and start exploring, eventually heading upstairs and finding a red door. Ray slowly opens it to find a chilling sight: the witch standing in the dark. She has elongated limbs and a crooked nose. Her mouth is bloody and stretches unnaturally far up her head. With glowing red eyes, she looks at them and says she's been waiting for them. The two friends take no time running like hell back downstairs, but they're cut off by another menacing figure: the straw man standing upright and holding a sickle. The door behind them is locked and the straw man is closing in, followed by the witch who's screeching and making her way down the stairs. It's a really scary situation. With no other option, they break a nearby window and jump out. At the front of the house, the others are about to head inside, but Paul looks through the doorway to see the straw man. Just then, Ray and Godric come from the side of the house and warn them to run, quickly explaining that they were almost killed. Paul tells them they've gone crazy and starts to once again reiterate that this is a theme park, but he's cut off mid-sentence when the straw man slices into the back of his leg. It's a deep cut, sending him to his knees as the blood soaks his jeans. He turns to look up at the menacing straw man looking down at him. Godric grabs Judy by the hand and runs away, pulling her with him. She begs him to let her go and looks back at her brother just in time for the straw man to slash into his back. It's an eerie few panels as Paul falls face first to the ground and the straw man stands behind him, soaked in blood. The others run through the woods until finally Judy breaks down into tears and won't go any further. Ray's pissed off and calls her useless, questioning why Godric even grabbed her in the first place. There's a piece of dialogue worth noting here where Godric says that he didn't want to leave her because he doesn't want to repeat what happened before. We'll know what he's referencing soon enough. Ray interrupts him to go on a rant about how we have a crybaby society that protects the weak with his taxes, and how if natural selection would have done its job, they wouldn't be dealing with this burden. Just then, the trees around them suddenly spring to life, sprouting red glowing eyes. Then a hand reaches out and grabs Godric by the ankle, dragging him into the forest. Ray tries to run away and looks back to see the haunting image of the witch watching him from between the trees. Her creepy posture soaked in that red glow is terrifying. Ray tries to run, but snags his foot on a rock and falls to the ground. When he looks up, the witch has somehow moved in on him at an alarming speed and leans over him, her mouth stretched out and hands reaching. It then cuts back to Eva's mother. We finally learn her name, Leslie, and it turns out she's a cop. The case of the missing friends had gone cold, but finally the court has allowed the police access to the friends' social media accounts where she finds an invitation to Grimmery Land. We then get a glimpse of the past. Leslie wakes up in the middle of the night to Eva screaming. She pulls out her gun only to find Eva crying alone in her room. It seems she's had a bad string of nightmares, but this time she claims she saw something for real standing in her room and staring at her with empty eyes. She calls the entity Grimmery. It cuts back to Grimmery Land, where Ray wakes up and finds himself hanging in a cage. Next to him he spots Godric, who's passed out, and down below Judy is sat in a chair. Ray begs for her to help him, and suddenly a disembodied voice laughs out and says that Judy was never meant to be in this park. Ray looks over to see several human tongues hanging on hooks from the ceiling. The voice continues speaking to Judy, giving her two options. She can free Ray and Godric and they can face the horrors of Grimmery Land together, or she can do nothing and will be shown the exit so she can go back to her family. A figure comes up behind her and puts their hands on her shoulders. Ray continues to beg her to help him, asking her what her brother would have done. She finally speaks, telling Ray that he didn't want to help Paul and now he's dead. She continues by pointing out that Ray doesn't like her because she's challenged, but just because some things are hard for her doesn't mean she's worthless. She knows how to help people, for instance, a quality that Ray lacks. She looks up at Ray and tells him point blank she's leaving. We see Judy's silhouette walking back down the yellow brick road while Ray cries out, telling her what she's doing is wrong. Judy makes her way to the dock and approaches the ferry. We check back in with Leslie in the present. Clearly, Grimmery Land and her daughter's nightmares were connected because of the shared name, but this still doesn't get her any closer to finding Grimmery Land. She decides to interview the parents of the person that got the invitation and take a look around for anything useful to the case. Unfortunately, it seems like a dead end. Then she mentions someone entering the room and giving giving her a clue that would lead her to the park. We don't see who this was or what the clue is. Either way, Leslie hops on her police bike and zooms off. It cuts back to Judy standing on the dock, reliving the moment her brother died and screaming out. Elsewhere, Leslie makes her way into Grimmery Land and finds herself in the woods. We then see the same panel from the end of season 1 of Zoe yelling out as someone grabs her from the dark. Turns out that this was Leslie, and finally we're back to where we left off in season 1. Zoe recognizes Leslie as Eva's mother, but Leslie's confused. I guess she wasn't looking for Zoe and the others, but actually Godric, Ray, and Paul. This explains the timeline better. These three were the original group that went missing, and Zoe's group followed after. Apparently the person who told Leslie where to find Grimmery Land was Judy, since she made it out alive. Zoe leaps into Leslie's arms, crying about what happened. She suddenly remembers Bruno, and they look around for him by the exit and finally assume that he went through. Zoe and Leslie follow after and find that the doorway leads directly into an elevator. There are 3 floors labeled exit, park, and mirror. Zoe hits the exit button and off they go. Strange music begins to play and the elevator then stops for a moment before suddenly free falling. It hits the bottom floor, knocking the 2 women on their asses. They step into the next room to see a massive organ supporting a black screen. In front of the organ keys is a red chair. It twirls around to reveal who's sitting in it. Eva. I thought that it was implied that she was dead, but she seems perfectly fine here. Well, it's time to find out what really happened. In another flashback, there's a big barn party going on with hundreds of people. We can see the whole gang scattered about. Margot, Raimi, and Zoe are all dancing. Meanwhile, Eva has a seat next to Becca, who's totally drunk and telling her how pretty she is. Eva says she's gonna head out early as she has a big day of moving tomorrow. She leaves the barn and starts walking, but finds that she may be more intoxicated than she thought. Something strange is going on with her vision that seems to be more than just the alcohol. Then, none other than Godric shows up and asks her if she's okay. He tells her she's had too much to drink and not to worry, he'll get her home. It quickly turns into a shady situation as Godric puts her between him and Ray in the backseat of a car driven by Paul. It goes as badly as you might expect. The 2 guys in the back start taking advantage of her and feeling her up. They go so far as to take pictures of it. In another twist, they send the pictures to a group chat that happens to include their good friend Jax. He's at the party too, and even he knows this is messed up, calling them idiots. He tells them that Eva's mom is a cop and they all freak out. At the same time, Eva's not looking so good and we learn that they drugged her drink, which is why she's gotten so messed up. They also imply this hasn't been the first time they've done this. Damn, I think we officially have our new most hated characters. In a full-blown panic, they open the back door and push her out onto the side of a mountain road. We then hear Eva's narration, saying, "They threw me to the fire. What they didn't know was that after the flames, my ashes would feed the creation of a new world." It cuts to 3 naked men with shaved heads, and she continues saying, "This would be a place where we could be whoever we wanted." It then shows Ray with a device keeping his mouth wide open and someone stretching his tongue out of his mouth. I guess this is where all the tongues come from. It ends with the 3 mascots standing ominously. Wow, so this is implying that the 3 killer mascots were actually Ray, Godric, and probably Paul, having their tongues cut out and being forced to do Grimmery's bidding. And at this point, it looks like Eva is Grimmery. Leslie is stunned at the sight of her supposedly dead daughter, and Zoe questions why she would do all this. They were good friends. Eva says that a real friend wouldn't have covered up what they had done to her. Zoe's pretty confused. Cover up what? Eva just calls her and the rest of the friends rotten liars. She barely had to put in any effort before the group started destroying themselves. Zoe just ignores her and demands she show them the exit, but Eva reminds her that Bruno is still here, captured by a mascot and hidden somewhere in the mansion. She says that it's haunted, however, and every time she plays the organ, whatever room they're in will become hostile. When they're ready, they can enter the doors in front of them. Leslie begs Eva to tell her what's really going on. How is this possible? But she just tells her mother to hurry or she'll be carrying another death on her back. Seems like they have no choice, so they walk through the doors. They find themselves in a large mansion hallway with a massive suit of armor against the wall and a portrait of a hunter. Eva begins playing the organ and the music can be heard through speakers around the mansion. attention. Suddenly, the lights go out in the hall, and the suit of armor they passed has moved and is facing them. Its eyes glow green, and it starts moving toward them, slashing at them with one of its swords. But they manage to hide in an unlocked room. They look around, and it's pretty creepy in here. There's a Ouija board on the table, and the words "I love you, Vanessa" written in blood on the wall next to a portrait of a disturbing looking old man. They find a newspaper with a story about a medium who fell in love with a ghost named Vanessa and committed suicide to be with her. Zoe slowly opens a nearby cabinet and a body falls out onto the floor. It seems to be the medium's. They decide in order to move forward they'll need to play along, so they both sit at the table and play with the Ouija board. Sure enough, the planchette begins to move, spelling out the word howdy. At the same time, the organ begins to play once again and the table starts violently shaking while the lights turn blue. They look over and find that the corpse of the medium is missing. And when Leslie looks back, there's a figure standing behind Zoe. It's a pretty creepy and well done sequence because of the portrait on the wall. When the medium appears, he's standing in front of it, so it's a subtle change that's really effective. The medium lunges at Zoe and still has a noose dangling from his neck. He grabs her by the throat and starts choking her, saying the words, "Everything was a lie, she never loved me. She only wanted my soul and now she wants yours." It gets kind of cryptic and weird after this. He says, "We cannot see the other side because it's impossible to exceed the speed of light, but they can watch you die in my hands." This seems like utter gibberish, but actually ties into the biggest mystery of this comic that we'll get to later. Leslie pulls out her pistol and shoots the medium in the head, which crumbles like a doll. They exit the room and find that the hallway is back to normal, including the hulking suit of armor. Zoe takes another look at the hunter portrait and finds that he's wearing a name tag that says howdy. The music starts playing again and the armor's eyes glow green. Leslie starts taking shots at it with her gun to no effect, while Zoe tries to figure out what's up with the portrait. Finally, she sees that there's a hole over the hunter's mouth, and nearby she finds a pipe. She puts it in the portrait's mouth and the wall swings open, revealing a hidden door. Man, this is like a really messed up escape room. The door shuts behind them, saving them from the armor, but who knows what awaits them in here. It's clearly a trophy room for the hunter, with a roaring fireplace and dozens of exotic animal heads mounted on the walls. They look around and find a pistol sitting on the hunter's desk as well, but they're not sure what any of this means. Eva then begins playing the organ again, and blood starts pouring from the animals' eyes and mouths. It starts filling the room up fast and quickly raises to their waists. They've got to think fast or they're gonna drown in blood. They start to panic and eventually are swimming in it as it rises to the ceiling. Looking up, they see there's a hole in the ceiling, but it's only big enough to fit one of their heads. Maybe they're meant to use it to breathe. Well, they're gonna have to find out as the blood completely fills the room. They hold their breath and Leslie puts her head through the hole. In a really bizarre moment, she finds that on the other side, her head looks like it's mounted on the wall and a giraffe sits at a desk on the other side looking up at her as if he's the hunter. I know it's a high anxiety moment, but that's just funny. Below, Zoe is running out of air and tags Leslie out to stick her head through. Man, this whole situation is my nightmare, I have to say. Anyway, Zoe notices that the giraffe is pointing at a pistol on the desk in this room, and a lion is standing nearby pointing at a target on the wall. She realizes that this is a mirror of the room that they're in, so she swims down and finds the pistol on the desk and then proceeds to fire it. This opens the door back up and drains the room of blood. After catching their breath, they make their way back into the hall where they find the final door is open, and inside is Bruno tied up on the floor. Zoe tries to untie him while Leslie runs back to the hunter's trophy room to grab a knife. When she returns, she finds that the floor in the room has begun to slowly disappear. She throws the knife to Zoe, who cuts Bruno free, but the gap in the floor is pretty big now and they can't jump back. Leslie runs back to Eva and starts yelling at her, saying she has no right to toy with their lives like this. Eva says she had a life once too. She thought her illness would keep her from her dreams, but the real danger actually came from those around her. We can see the floor running out as Zoe and Bruno clutch the wall behind them. Eva continues her rant, saying that they seem like ordinary people, just a group of friends, but they're actually psychopaths, criminals, and liars, and all she's done is unmask them. Leslie demands that she stop playing the organ, and now she's aiming her gun right at her daughter. Eva continues, saying, "Sorry, Mom, it's time to exterminate these rats." We can see the floor is now only inches from Zoe and Bruno's feet. Leslie says, "Stop calling me Mom, you're not my daughter," and shockingly pulls the trigger. It cuts to another flashback, the day Leslie woke up to a call about a body found off the side of the highway. She went to investigate it, only to find the cold corpse of her own daughter. It seems when the guys tossed her body out of the car, she tumbled down a hill and was left for dead. This just devastates Leslie and Eva's father, Tim. There's a pretty intense moment of Tim crying out in pure agony over her death. It cuts ahead to Eva's funeral, attended by Raimi, Zoe, Becca, and Jax. Jax is clearly feeling guilty, and we can see the group chat again. Jax says he doesn't want to be in this group anymore, and one of the others, either Ray or Godric, threatens him, saying if he rats them out, they'll kill him. Jesus. Tim puts a picture of Eva on her casket and is completely overwhelmed with emotion. It goes black and we see the words, Jax has left the group. It then jumps back to the present. Zoe and Bruno hear the gunshot sound in the next room and the floor begins to reappear. They walk out to find Leslie on the floor, trying to reassure herself that this couldn't have really been her daughter. Zoe looks up to see Eva's body slumped in the chair and tells Leslie that there's no way it was. They all run to the elevator and once again hit the exit button. This time they actually go to the right floor and find the exit, stepping out into the daylight of the real world. Next, we see news coverage of the event about how a missing persons case eventually led to the disturbing discovery of Grimmeryland. We even see a reporter inside breaking down the whole story. It then cuts to another TV program that kind of seems like a parody of The View or something, where some women argue about how this place could have been built by one person. One of them even suggests something more supernatural is happening, and it seems there's a ton of conspiracy theories surrounding it. We also learn that some of the missing people's bodies were never found, and it seems this must be Raimi and Margot. As they continue discussing the bizarre event, we see a casket in the back of a hearse traveling down a country road. And that's the end of season 2. It's obviously kind of different from season 1 with the introduction of all these new characters, but it kind of came together by the end, even if now we have more questions than answers. Like, was that really Eva or what? But if you thought this was wacky, just wait and see how season 3 ends. You'll never guess what happens. Speaking of which, let's get into season 3. It kicks off once again in a flashback. Jax is having a costume party, and by the pool, Eva and Becca are telling creepy stories. Eva says she doesn't believe in the supernatural, but did have one weird thing happen to her when she was a kid. She would often visit her mother's friend's house. Eva liked going because the woman had a cute dog named Pinky, and her granddaughter was the same age as her. She mentions that the woman had a haunted look, but was actually very nice. One time, Eva went out to the back garden to find Pinky, but when she tried to go back inside, she just kept ending up in the garden again, like she was in some kind of infinite loop. In retrospect, she probably was just confused and walking in circles, but it was a terrifying experience for a little kid. Nearby at the party, some other familiar faces sit at a picnic table. Bruno is using a strange ball suspended by threads. I'm not sure if this is a real-world fortune-telling device or something made up entirely for this story, but he says there are multiple universes and he can use the ball to find the link between you and your soulmate from another universe. For instance, he uses it on Raimi, whose link is a star. However, when he tried it on Becca, nothing showed up, meaning no one has the same reverberation to her in a nearby universe. Margot's pretty annoyed that her and Zoe got the same symbol despite being so different. They wonder what Eva's link will be, and it turns out to be the symbol of a spider. It jumps to Eva before her death. She's practicing her photography when she hears a loud noise coming from the attic. She goes up to investigate and finds a beautiful stained glass window. When she pulls out her camera to take a photo, she finds something really disturbing: a black figure growing out of the floor. The entity is only seen through the camera lens though. Later we see Eva meeting up with Becca. They plan on checking out the house her mother's friend lived in, hoping the new owner will let them have a look around for the nostalgia factor. Well, it seems the woman's granddaughter, who Eva used to play with, inherited it, so they're invited inside to catch up. At one point, Eva asks to use the bathroom, but on her way she ends up in the back garden, which looks exactly how she remembers it from when she was a kid. She can even see a gravestone for poor little Pinky. When she turns back to the house, she finds that there are two identical doors leading back inside, which might be why she got lost as a kid. This time she'll be sure to go back where she came from. In the hall, she sees a portrait of her mother's friend sitting in a chair. There's something about it that just doesn't sit right. She reaches the end of the hallway, but it only leads her back to the garden. This happens a few times, and just when she starts to freak out, she actually does find the bathroom. However, when she steps back out, she finds herself in the garden again, and this time it's completely dark out, as if hours have passed. In the nearby koi pond, she sees that the fish are dead and floating. She runs back inside in a panic, and behind her we can see that the portrait of the woman has changed. Only the chair remains. Eva stops in her tracks when she spots a looming figure at the end of the dark hallway. Hoping it's only Becca, she she pulls out her phone light and moves closer. But it's not Becca. It's the woman, who turns around, her head shaking violently, and she holds the skeleton of the dog in her arms. The woman says it's been so long since she's seen Eva, and that she dug Pinky up to make space for Eva in the garden, so that she can take the dog's place. Her face stops shaking, and we see her creepy smile. It's one of those uncanny valley things. It just looks off. Eva runs outside to find a gravestone with her name on it, and the haunted woman floats toward her, saying she can't run from her destiny. Eva quickly scales the garden wall and falls with a thud on the other side. When she looks up, she finds herself back in the attic by the stained glass window. A voice speaks to her, saying, "You cannot see the lens through which you are being watched." And when Eva looks through her camera, she finds the dark figure has grown taller, and now it resembles Gremory. He speaks again, saying, "They can see you right now." And when she looks up from the camera, Gremory is standing right in front of her, creepy as ever. In reality, Eva is collapsed in the hallway, screaming out while Becca sits by her side. She snaps out of it with tears in her eyes and tells Becca that something is seriously wrong with her. After this incident, Eva was diagnosed with a type of schizophrenia, and her parents decided to move her to the city where she'd be closer to a clinic to receive better treatment. Despite this illness, Eva stayed positive and tried to live a normal life, something Becca deeply admired her for. Back in the present, Leslie is still riddled with guilt, having shot her own daughter, or at least something pretending to be her daughter. To be sure, she has Eva's grave dug up and finds it's empty. Maybe it really was Eva. Meanwhile, Zoe's been going to therapy to try and cope with what she went through. She feels a little guilty about locking Raimi up, especially now that he was never found. But it didn't seem like there was any other option. He was a killer after all, but still it feels like the decision may have to do with the violence that she experienced at home. We learned that her father beat her mother on a regular basis, eventually prompting Zoe to leave. It seems she feels guilty about this as well, and the therapist recommends trying to accept the decision she's made and find some peace. Back at her apartment, Zoe is looking at some old pictures of her and Raimi when she suddenly gets a message from Becca asking, "Have you forgotten about me?" Zoe replies that this is a sick joke to pull, but Becca continues saying, "You promised that nothing would separate us." And since Zoe didn't keep her promise, she's coming to look for her. The lights go out in the room and Zoe's door creaks open. A voice calls out saying, "You've been invited." She follows it into the hall to find a Gremory doll on the floor holding a ticket to Gremory Land. She then gets another message that says, "It's so nice to be near you again." There's a picture attached that seems to be taken from right behind her. Now that is creepy. Next, we check in with Bruno. I guess he works at a nursing home. He texts Zoe wondering why she hasn't replied in a while and says that he's here to talk when she needs it. One of the old women in the home isn't wanting to take her pills, and Bruno volunteers to take care of it. He enters the woman's room and tries to start a friendly dialogue with her, although it does seem like she has a form of dementia. She tells Bruno she's getting married and that her mother is so happy, but her father yelled at her and called her a sinner because she's pregnant. Well, that took an unexpected turn. Later that night, Bruno gets an alert from the old woman's room, and when he walks in, he finds her staring out the window into the rainy dark. He tries to get her back into bed, but the woman says that her father is very angry about what Bruno did and that he's coming to look for him. Well, that's kind of spooky. Bruno's a little confused, and the woman says, "Don't you see him? He's just out there." Bruno looks out the window to see a figure in a raincoat standing down below. Just then, the woman grabs Bruno by the wrist and yells at him for not showing up to the altar and abandoning her. He tries to settle her down, and meanwhile, the person outside breaks in downstairs and is making his way up to Bruno. The old woman says she loves him and that he's everything to her. This instantly gives Bruno a flashback of Margot, who said the same thing to him that night in Gremory Land. He looks over to see the person in the raincoat standing in the doorway to the room, and they're holding a syringe full of some unknown substance, saying, "You've been invited." Well, I think we can see where this is going. I have a feeling we're headed back to Gremory Land, and soon. In the past, shortly after Eva's death, we can see her parents, Leslie and Tim, arguing. Leslie is mad that Tim let her attend that party without telling her, and he thought she deserved to have some fun after dealing with all the bad hallucinations. It gets pretty heated and ends with Leslie kicking Tim out of the house. It moves ahead a bit, and Leslie shows up at Tim's motel room to apologize about how angry she got. He says he's thinking of moving into his parents' old funeral home that he inherited. This is a small detail that is actually really important later. Tim says everything's going to be okay and that he actually found a way to fix all of this. But before we find out what he's she's talking about, it cuts back to the present. Leslie is listening to the show where the women discuss the Grimmeryland incident while she looks through some old photos. One of the women mentions that the friends were brought to the park by a limo and wonders who was driving it. At the same time, Leslie sees a picture of her and Tim standing in front of the funeral home. It suddenly hits her. It wasn't a limo, it was a hearse. She immediately hops on her motorcycle and heads to Tim's funeral home. No one answers the door, so she climbs in through the back window. She looks in the garage to find a black hearse, but it's locked. Looking for the keys, she ends up down in the mortuary, and instead of the keys, she finds a ticket to Grimmeryland. She makes a call to the police station telling them she's identified the Grimmeryland vehicle. The person on the line tells her she needs to back off this case. She's too close to it. And behind Leslie, we can see one of the mortuary drawers open up and a figure reaching out. While Leslie continues arguing about the case, a figure in a raincoat climbs out and approaches her from behind. But before we see what happens, it cuts back to Zoe. She wakes up and finds herself outside the entrance to Grimmeryland, only this time it's covered in blood. She tries to run away, but she's sealed inside. Out from the entrance, a small cart rolls onto a track as if asking Zoe to climb inside. She realizes she has no choice and sits in the cart. It wheels into the park and in front of a Grimmery statue that's been overtaken by large strange vines. Its arms are outstretched, pointing left and right. The statue speaks, asking which way she wants to go. To the left is the Museum of Sleepers, and to the right is the park exit. Zoe's pretty clever and thinks that Grimmery must be talking about his right, not hers, so she turns left. Unfortunately, Grimmery says that she's chosen the museum. Although, let's be honest, she probably would have ended up there no matter what she chose, since Grimmery decides which way is left and right. Elsewhere, Bruno wakes up in a small room. In front of him is a tub of popcorn and a large cup with a sticky note that reads, "Drink me to begin the movie." The door is locked, and after waiting around for a half an hour, Bruno comes to the conclusion that he's not getting out of here unless he plays along, so he drinks from the cup. As soon as he does, the room doors open and he walks out into a movie theater. There's no other exit, so he sits down. The projector kicks on and it cuts back to Leslie. She seems to be sitting in her apartment when she hears the doorbell ring. But when she opens the door, she finds that she's actually standing in the living room of the first attraction the friends went on, the Happy Family Ride. Zoe arrives at the Museum of Sleepers and sees the same setup as before. Jeff's standing there looking at a TV screen mounted on the wall. Only this time it says New Exhibit. Zoe makes her way into the next room where there are several lit model houses on display. One shows the silhouette of a little girl and her father. Below, in red, the girl is crying at his grave. The next house shows a man, woman, and their teenage daughter. Below, the man is beating the woman. And in the final house, the man is pointing a gun at her. Zoe moves along until she comes upon another exhibit. Behind some glass, she sees Becca, or at least a realistic looking puppet of her. She's held by marionette strings and a bullet hole is still in her head. She yells out that they are all just puppets for entertainment and starts flailing her limbs around. Then Zoe hears the familiar wheels of Jeff coming for her with his nightstick. She runs away and eventually Jeff stops in his tracks. Literally, the track ends. Zoe mocks him while she has the chance and even flips him the bird. But in a terrifying twist, Jeff simply walks off the tracks and keeps moving toward her. She continues running until she hits a patch of ice and slips, falling onto her back. I guess it's snowing in this exhibit. Jeff comes right at her, this time with the taser, and Zoe does a straight up kung fu move, sweeping his legs and knocking him over. She gets up and looks over to see a small winter lodge and Jeff's tiny family, who all come out to berate her about what she did. I didn't expect that. Meanwhile, Jeff's eyes glow red, and as he stands up, his arm breaks off his body, spilling a green ooze out. From the wound, a freaking machine gun pops out. It's like something from Tokyo Gore Police. He starts firing at her, and Zoe runs again until the floor gives out and she falls into the darkness below. She survived the fall, but when she looks up, she finds another exhibit, and behind the glass is Raimi. Next, we jump back to the past. Zoe's father is abusing her mother when Zoe steps out of her room and confronts him. Surprisingly, it's Zoe's mother who tells her to stay out of it. Later, after hearing a news report about an abusive husband killing his wife, Zoe is really afraid that her dad will take it too far one day. During one of the violent encounters, Zoe secretly films it. Then, after a heated exchange one day, her father looks as if he's about to hit her, but she pulls out her phone and shows the video. She says she has copies of it and tells him if he doesn't leave right now, she'll show it to the police. So the next thing we see is her father doing just that. The sad part is Zoe's mother is in shambles and begs for him not to go. However, Zoe's life improves drastically, not having to carry around that constant fear. Then one day, while walking home from school, she spots her mother at a motel kissing her father in secret. Back at home, Zoe tries to talk some sense into her mother, but she completely defends her husband's actions and even claims that it's her fault. She just needs to treat him better. Finally, Zoe gives her an ultimatum. Either her mother picks her or her father. She refuses to pick, and so Zoe leaves. Back in the present, Raimi's upset that Zoe ditched him here and expected a little more understanding from his best friend. Zoe reminds him that he killed somebody. What's she supposed to do, just accept that? Raimi tells her that now he's so much stronger because he stopped judging every little move he made and denying who he really is. He snaps his fingers and a wall of TV screens light up the other side of the room. Sitting in the glow is Zoe's father, his hands bound and mouth taped. On the TVs, a news report begins to play covering an incident where a 47-year-old woman was killed by her husband. It seems to imply that this was actually Zoe's mother, and Raimi says her father is here to give her a chance at revenge. Nearby is a red button, and if Zoe presses it, her father will die. She stands motionless for a moment, remembering all those horrible incidents that she was forced to witness between her parents. Gritting her teeth, she runs up to the button and stops just before pressing it. Ultimately, she can't bring herself to do it. She wants to change things in the world, and by doing it properly through the law, hoping one day it will lead to fewer men in the future doing the same thing. Raimi tells her that she shouldn't worry. Her mother is actually fine, and in fact, she finally left her father. It was all a ruse to get her to commit a heinous act. Raimi says that he actually spent a lot of time trapped in that room and was haunted by what he did. He didn't feel better by killing Jax. In the end, he only felt sadness. He was supposed to try and trick her to press the button. It wasn't really her test, but his. The floor Raimi sits on begins slowly descending into darkness, and he says, "They're gonna take me somewhere I deserve. After what I've done, there's no future for me outside of Grimmery Land." Zoe cries out for him as he's slowly engulfed by the dark. Finally, we check back with Bruno. The projector kicks on and we see a title card that says Grimmery Land presents Margot R. in The Actress. Here we actually get Margot's full backstory. Her parents were neglectful and abusive, and eventually she ended up at an orphanage, which she describes as cold and dark. One day, a man adopted her. He was a kind man who wanted to try and help her succeed. He asked her what she wanted to do when she grew up, and she decided she wanted to be an actress. After this, her father paid for acting lessons, and she was in multiple school plays. The years went on, and her father became very ill, eventually dying. Her aunt then moved into her father's house to be her caretaker. She's a cruel, selfish woman who tells Margot she won't be doing her acting classes anymore because it's a waste of money. She even goes so far as to blame Margot for her father's death. And it just keeps getting worse. This awful woman turns Margot's room into a home gym and moves Margot into a dingy closet with almost no possessions. By the time Margot's a teenager, her aunt bans her from going out at night, and instead she's supposed to stay home and clean. Also, the money Margot earns at her weekend job are now going to be going towards household expenses, aka straight to her aunt. This is pretty heartbreaking because Margot got the job just so she could save up for more acting lessons. Around this time is when Margot reconnected with Bruno and started spending time with him and his family to get away from her aunt. Of course, when she's home, she's forced to clean up after her obnoxious aunt, and her part-time fast food job is brutal, especially because she's essentially doing this only to fuel her aunt's spending habits. One night she comes back home and finds her piggy bank is broken. Her aunt smashed it and took the money she had previously saved up. Margot is pissed. She grabs her aunt by the necklace and threatens to cut her throat if she doesn't give her her money back. She moves out on her own after this and is living in a shoddy apartment downtown while she tries to get acting gigs. It's not working out so well, and she even goes so far as to sleep with the director to try and get a part. Well, he has no problem taking what he can get and still doesn't give her the part. Eventually, she completely breaks down and actually contemplates ending it all when she gets a group text invite from Becca, who invites them all to go to Grimmery Land. This brings us back to the present where Bruno looks visibly sick. Suddenly, Margot pops out from behind the curtains, and this is really sick, dude, but she's done her hair up to look like Mia. She says the drugs seem to be taking effect, and I guess it's a mixture of some kind of tranquilizer and Viagra, because he can't really move and suddenly pops a boner. Yeah, I was not expecting that. Margot then proceeds to force force herself onto him in a pretty twisted scene. However, Bruno just starts crying and points out that if Margot really loved him, she wouldn't be doing this to him, and she wouldn't have killed his sister. She doesn't care about him at all, really. If she really loved him, why would she keep hurting him? Yeah, despite her tragic backstory, Margot might have made it back to the #1 hated spot. Next, we check in with Leslie at the Happy Family attraction. She hops into a black baby carriage cart and the ride starts up. In the first room, she sees Mrs. Thompson standing in the kitchen saying that the worst thing a mother can suffer is losing her child, and it can cause her to do crazy things. From a different angle, we can see that she's chopping up a human leg. Pretty gnarly. She looks over and says, "But not all mothers love their children, do they, Leslie?" The lights then cut out and the mother creeps up on Leslie, jumping over the cart and jamming her thumbs in Leslie's eyes. She smacks the puppet off with her flashlight and the ride starts back up, bringing her to the next room. Leslie pulls out her handgun and along the tracks are dozens of dolls. Standing in the middle is the little boy from the family. He says that his sister Eva died and then he accuses Leslie of killing her. He then crawls on his back like the Exorcist or something and climbs up the walls. Leslie loses track of him, but then another figure appears. The boy's baby doll comes walking out. It's a perfect distraction and the boy pounces on Leslie, but she fires off 2 rounds, blowing the kid's face apart. The mother then comes up from behind with her knife, but before she reaches Leslie, the cart starts moving again. The tracks lead through a trapdoor and into a massive room filled with lava. It kind of looks like hell. As she speeds down the track, the massive demonic fetus from season 1 rises from the lava and looks over at her. Man, I didn't expect to see this thing again. It chases behind the cart, but a set of doors open up to safety ahead, and the tracks end in a dark room. Leslie looks up to see a figure in a raincoat staring at her. He pulls his hood off to reveal that it's her husband, Eva's father, Tim. It cuts back to the moment Tim tells Leslie he can fix everything and has something to show her. He brings her back to his room where there's a pinboard with various newspaper articles and clippings about traveling to other universes. Tim asks her to sit down and listen to his full explanation. Using a bizarre illustration of 2 men shooting light rays at each other while inside of a traveling rocket, he lays out the theory of relativity. To put it simply, he believes that time is relative to the observer and that if they could reach the speed of light, they could travel through time and maybe see Eva again. Understandably, Leslie is a little freaked out, thinking Tim has lost his marbles. He apologizes and she asks him to come back home so they can work through this together. Back at the house, Tim wakes up in the middle of the night and continues down his rabbit hole searching the web. Eventually, he believes there are beings that have broken outside of the fixed limits of our universe and are watching from the outside. He says that the light comes from our creator, and he looks at a bizarre image of a being hovering above the universe with a black hole where its face should be. Suddenly, Tim sees himself in the rocket ship, pointing a gun at Leslie, who's doing the same. She encourages him to fire at the same time so they can free themselves from the material universe and maybe see Eva again. In reality, Tim is simply standing by the bed, pointing Leslie's gun at her. He snaps out of the delusion, drops the gun, and runs away. We then see Tim running through the woods when he comes upon a light. It's the being from the picture he saw. He jumps into the light and is confronted by this being. Tim asks who they are and they introduce themselves as Grimmery. He says though Tim's nature doesn't allow him to see beyond the limits, Grimmery sensed his suffering and reached out from the other side. He then tells Tim he will help him get Eva back, but in order to do so, he will need to go back to the family home and enter the attic. Grimmery says that Eva projected him from her dreams until eventually she made him real. Tim climbs into the attic and finds a Grimmery costume lying on the floor. He then instructs Tim to go to the cemetery, dig up his daughter's corpse, put it in the costume, and then bury it in a patch of wilderness far away from society. Then he must leave and not return for 7 days. We can see a strange light shoot down from space on the spot where Eva is buried. When Tim returns, he sees a huge hole in the ground and follows it down until he finds a room. Inside is a casket standing upright and great red vines growing out of it. I'm telling you, man, it just keeps getting weirder from here. Back in the present, Tim greets Leslie and tells her that they are prisoners in their own universe, but Grimmery heard him from the outside. He explains that Grimmery can read their timeline like a book and can freely travel to the past at will. Eva was used as a seed to build the park, and now it's the only place she can continue to exist. Then Eva herself rolls out in a wheelchair and greets her mother. She commands Tim to take Leslie's gun before she shoots her again, and after a tense dispute, Leslie hands it over. Eva then then tells Tim to shoot her so she'll stay here forever. Of course, Tim hesitates at the thought of shooting his own ex-wife, but Eva encourages him, saying they'll be together forever if he does. Leslie tries to talk some sense into him, telling him that he's being manipulated by Gremory to help feed this system. It's a pretty crazy image of Tim holding the gun to her head like that. Eva tells him to just do it, or Leslie will ruin the park like she did last time. She gets fed up with Tim's reluctance and starts screaming at him to just shoot her in the face or she'll do it herself. This really doesn't sound like the Eva that they knew, and Tim instead moves the gun to Eva. In a shocking moment, he pulls the trigger, and we see the wheelchair topple over and blood coat the floor. Tim then proceeds to put the gun to his own head and shoot himself. Whoa. For a moment, we see the messed up scene with Margot advancing on Bruno with Mia's hair. Then it cuts to Margot sitting on a bench and looking at her phone. There's a strange moment here where Margot looks up directly at the screen and seemingly breaks the fourth wall, saying, "What are you looking at?" Back in the theater, Bruno wakes up to see a movie on the screen called The Last Supper. He moves behind the curtains, and then we check in with Zoe. A door opens up from the wall and she looks out to see the car on the rails again. She says that she's so sick of this shit as she hops into the cart once again. It takes her to a wooded area where she runs into Bruno. They tell each other what happened and conclude that Raimi and Margot are somehow part of the park now. Once again, they're left with no choice but to continue with the next game, and they look over to see a mansion. They walk inside to find a huge dining room with several puppets seated at the table. They also find Leslie inside crying her eyes out. Gremory's voice rings out from an intercom welcoming them to Gremory's mansion and telling them to have a seat. Zoe wonders what the point of this is. Why not just kill them and be done with it? Gremory says that a potential murderer hides among them, and the objective is to identify the murderer and kill them before midnight. If they don't do this, they all die. In order to do so, they'll need the items left on the table. They uncover their plates to find a wrench, a candlestick, and a pistol, straight out of Clue. Gremory then introduces the other members of the dinner party, some of which are familiar. Henry the Medium, Howdy the Hunter, and two new faces, Annie the Cook and Gladys the Widow. They all stand up and scatter across the mansion. Zoe and the others follow behind them, not sure how best to discover the murderer. They enter the widow's room for a second and her eyes glow red, so they nope out real quick, assuming the red eyes indicate suspicion. They hear a loud noise coming from the kitchen and look inside to see the cook dead on the floor and Henry standing over her body. Zoe yells out that she found the murderer and shoots Henry, exploding the doll's face. However, Gremory informs them that Annie had actually died of a heart attack and that Henry was innocent, meaning now Zoe is technically the killer. We can see the other dinner guests' eyes glow red as they prepare to hunt Zoe down. Despite the warning that they're all going to die if the murderer isn't killed, Leslie refuses to play along and instead decides to try and hide her. So Bruno and Zoe hide in the freezer just as Howdy charges into the kitchen, blowing the door down with a shotgun. Leslie pulls out her gun and fires some shots off at him, taking him down. She bends over to pick up his shotgun, but behind her the widow sneaks up with a syringe, stabbing it into her back and injecting her with who knows what. She cries out to warn the others and the widow moves in on the freezer. Zoe readies her gun, but surprisingly the widow doesn't enter. Instead, she lowers the freezer temp to well below zero and locks the door, trapping Bruno and Zoe inside to freeze to death. Leslie reaches out but soon loses consciousness from the injection. We then get a quick flash of several previous panels, all of which hold a clue to what's really going on here. First, the medium saying that he can't see the other side because it's impossible to exceed the speed of light, but how they will watch Zoe die in his hands. Then the instance when Eva encountered Gremory in the attic and he said you cannot see the lens through which you are being watched, but they can see you. And finally, Becca saying that they are nothing but puppets for their entertainment. All of these mention a they, but who is they? We then see Margot waking up in the woods. It seems like this takes place right after she fell from the roller coaster tracks. Surprisingly, she's okay. She's approached by Tim, who leads her to the chamber with the organ and the giant black screen, only this time it's filled with static. He tells her that this is the mirror room and that it's the only place that connects with those who observe us from outside. Margot's confused, just like me, and Tim declares that Gremory Land is a lie and he'll show her the truth. The organ plays and Margot Margot is shocked at what she sees on the screen. Now, I don't know if y'all are ready to get this weird, but on the screen is a human woman. I don't mean in the comic there's a woman, I mean there's an actual real picture of a woman. So yeah, prepare for one of the most what the fuck endings to any comic I've ever covered. Tim says that she is one of those from the other side, the place that exists beyond the light of our universe. He mentions that there are more looking at them through the lens right now. He calls them gods who can travel through their time like an open book. Tim then says he has one last thing to show Margot. Her phone buzzes and she looks down to see herself. She freaks out and turns, looking directly at us, the readers, and Tim says that this is what they're seeing right now. So if you hadn't pieced it together, we as the readers are the gods, and we can manipulate time because we can read and reread the comic in whatever fashion we see fit. While they can't see the lens that we look through, Margot now has the ability to see what we're seeing on her phone. She looks down at it, and so do we, creating an infinity of looking at her and her phone. This revelation shocks her into unconsciousness, and she falls to the ground. This explains why Margot was breaking the fourth wall earlier. She knew we were looking at her on the park bench. It then cuts to Margot pressing a button at the cinema that has a casket on it, and we see her getting into the elevator exit in the woods. She goes down to the bottom floor and finds the room we saw earlier with the upright casket. It opens up and Gremory climbs out. Alright, next we move into the series finale, so buckle up because things are about to get weird. We get another glimpse of the past just after Eva was left for dead by the side of the highway. She's actually still alive at this point and struggles to try and stand. Then from out of the shadows, Gremory appears. He tells her she will inevitably die, but he's here to help her fulfill her destiny. She tries to run from him, but ends up falling off the edge of a cliff. She's then engulfed in white light, and Gremory tells her that she was drugged and shows her how her friends were all in on it. However, Gremory shows her a lie, how all of her friends got the pictures in a group chat and laughed at her. Even Bruno says he wishes she would die instead of his sister. Okay, well that explains why Eva was so hostile to all of them when she was brought back. It shows some images of the light shooting down again, and Tim opening the casket to see his daughter alive. Back in the present, Margot approaches the coffin now holding Gremory. She demands to know who he really is and what his goals are. He says that he's simply a costume attracted by the smell of suffering that your broken hearts gave off. He says that we are all Gremory, and each of us wears the costume for a different reason. Gremory Land exists because of all of you, especially those who observe from the outside and put on the mask with each new episode. Many of you wanted Jax to die, and so Gremory Land fulfilled that wish. Likewise, many wanted Judy to be saved, and so she was. She asks again who Gremory really is, and he replies, the answer is written on you. You may have noticed that this whole series, Margot has worn a shirt that has some Japanese lettering on it. Well, it translates to Rosin. The author of Gremory Land is a Rosin, so it seems safe to say that the author themselves are speaking through Gremory. Margot asks what he gains from all of this, and he creepily replies catharsis. It cuts to Zoe trying desperately to open the freezer door while Bruno shivers behind her. Zoe and Bruno then try to keep each other warm, staying hopeful that Leslie will get them out. Margot watches this play out on her phone. Gremory says that as long as they're in the system, anything is possible. She could get rid of Zoe and have Bruno all to herself, or even bring her father back to life. He asks her finally if she wants to join him. However, Margot reaches into her bag and pulls out a pistol, then points it at him. He says that she actually needs Gremory Land to survive, and reveals that Margot did die that day on the roller coaster. Like Eva, she was used as fuel for Gremory Land, and she cannot exist outside of it. Margot says she doesn't care anymore. She just wants Bruno to stop suffering because of her. She looks at her phone and sees Zoe and Bruno together holding hands in the freezer. She points the gun at Gremory once more, and he tries to tell her that she can't really kill him. This is nothing but a costume. But she has another plan. Using the phone, she can see that we're looking at her from behind. So she turns around and fires directly at the lens, shattering the screen along with Gremory Land. The author finishes by saying that the lens is broken, so they cannot continue. And that is the end of Gremory Land. Wow. Well, there you have it. You can see why a lot of people really found this ending disappointing. I had the luxury of reading through the whole series over the course of a week or two, so to me, the crazy direction the story went was kind of a novelty, and I actually found it pretty interesting from a sci-fi perspective. On the other hand, you can imagine people who were reading this as it came out week to week, getting fully invested in the characters, only to find that the ending got way too meta and focused more on the audience's interactions with the comic itself, rather than trying to tie up loose ends and wrap up the character stories that we actually care about. I should point out that if you look at the shattered screen in the final episode, there's some indication of what happened to the characters, like Raimi going to jail and Bruno and Zoe making it out okay in the end. If you remove expectation, the ending is pretty cool actually, but it felt like it belonged to a completely different comic. That being said, there were still some great moments and scares in the second half, so I really enjoyed covering this one. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments. As I said, this author has another series called Malvina's Therapy that a lot of people say is a better overall story, so I'm seriously considering covering it next. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now, and if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends. Somewhere in Northern Europe, a 5-star spa and hotel caters to anyone who can afford it, but things are amiss, especially as the mold sets in. Corpses begin appearing around the facility and no one acknowledges them. And that's just the beginning. Soon the black substance spreads and starts transforming the staff and clients into Eldritch-style abominations. Still, no one bats an eye. This is a world-class spa after all, and business must continue as usual. If you're a fan of David Lynch, Junji Ito, or Spirited Away, Spa is a must-read. This is an absolute nightmare sealed within the pages of a graphic novel. This is Spa. Hello friends, this is Grief speaking, and today we're going to be looking at Spa by Swedish author Erik Svetoft. I stumbled upon this comic by accident and honestly fell in love with it. If you like Beautiful Darkness, which I covered previously, you'll find some similarities in the horror here. And much like Beautiful Darkness, there's not a straightforward narrative. You're essentially watching as a cosmic horror overtakes a spa hotel. But under the surface and in the background, there is a lot to dissect, which makes this one perfect for theories as to what's really going on. I'm going to walk you through what happens from start to finish and wrap up with popular interpretations of Spa as well as my own wacky theory, so stay tuned for that. You guys should go subscribe to my second channel, Grief Speaks, for more casual and behind the scenes videos. I recently uploaded a tour of the Grief backdrop as well as my second mask, which never saw the light of day. I'll put a link in the description, but we have a lot to get to, so without further ado, this is Spa by Erik Svetoft explained. Spa starts off vague, surreal, and unsettling, and it keeps this tone for the rest of the comic. We see a man with slicked back hair in a bathrobe. He's on his knees in the dirt. He's got an off-putting smile and just calmly sits there as 3 cartoon-like characters close in on him with deadly weapons, seemingly beating him to death. Around them is a strange black sludge that seems to be growing around the bleak city buildings nearby. In one of the buildings, a woman looks down through an apartment window. Her husband then asks her if they live here, and she responds, "I guess so." They detect a foul odor and look in the bathroom to see 2 corpses rotting, one in the tub and one face down in the toilet. And shortly after this, they find a body in the kitchen and another in the hall. The couple shows no emotion or surprise at the dead people, and the man suggests they go on a relaxing weekend, maybe unwind a little and think about something else for a few days. Since there's been a weird atmosphere here lately, maybe it'll be better when they get back. As they discuss this on the couch, we can see opposite them in an armchair is another corpse rotting away. The art style is beyond creepy, not just on the corpses, but the bland faces of the living, and get used to it because many of the people in this comic have basically the same face. What's creepier than the situation itself is the complete lack of reaction from the couple, as if seeing dead bodies in your apartment is nothing but a minor annoyance. Not only that, but they don't even seem sure that they live here. This is a running theme in this comic that adds a really unsettling dreamlike quality. The next section seems straight out of a Wes Anderson film, with several spa employees talking directly to the camera, or in this case the reader. We learn that this is an award-winning facility that takes a holistic view, providing space for relaxation and human interaction. There's something for everyone, so open your mind, gain fresh insight and energy. We see a montage of people enjoying the benefits of the spa, and then the spa director director saying he looks forward to your visit, followed by a pretty freaky couple sharing some champagne. Their smiles are just not right. Next, we follow a new employee on his first day on the job. His supervisor walks him through his duties, which entails keeping fresh towels stocked throughout the facility and discarding the used ones. His supervisor then mentions that today is inspection day. This is actually an important detail. Elsewhere in the shower, some cleaners discover a strange black gunk and have a hard time removing it. Assuming it's some kind of moisture damage, they decide to call in some technicians. As the new guy delivers some towels, we can see the liquid covering the ceiling, some of which drips onto his shoulder. In the hotel cafeteria, the couple from the beginning are enjoying their stay. They discuss how great of an idea this was. However, they spot something weird across the cafeteria. At one of the tables sits another corpse, its skin shriveled and rotted. It's a disturbing sight, and like usual, everyone completely ignores it. At the same time, a business is having a conference here and is treating its employees to the spa for the weekend. One of the employees says he's going to check out early as he has some important business to attend to. Just a side note, since there are no names in this comic and there are a lot of characters, it can get confusing, so I'm going to call this character Blonde Guy so you know who I'm talking about. As he leaves the cafeteria, a strange looking guy locks eyes with him and calls him a loser. Elsewhere, we see the spa director sitting cross-legged, wearing a Speedo and smoking in his office. Soon, his personal assistant comes in to inform him that they have a VIP guest and that he should welcome them personally. As the assistant leaves, her inner monologue informs us that she has feelings for the director and wonders if he feels the same. As she walks down the hall, she finds some of the black sludge on the walls and floor. She sees a cleaner nearby and scolds her for the mess. Two gentlemen enter the front doors of the spa. One is wearing a police uniform. They say they're here for the inspection, and while the receptionist informs the director, the cop has a hard candy from a bowl on the counter. He clearly enjoys it and then proceeds to dump the entire bowl into his jacket, which made me laugh. The receptionist then hands them a briefcase that seems full of money and they leave. Next, the VIP customer enters, a tan man with exquisite taste. We see a little montage of the rest of the spa, including a pretty big image of the lounge. I can't help but scan the page, looking for anything strange or sinister in the background, but other than some creepy looking individuals, it seems normal. The VIP gets situated in a robe and has a martini, while the director's assistant inspects the employees to make sure everything is in order for their special guest. She sees the new guy has a spot on his shirt from the sludge and gives him a dirty look after cleaning it off. The director then comes into the lounge to greet the VIP. He gives him the whole spiel about how great the facilities are and has someone escort the man to his room. Shortly after, the assistant whispers in the director's ear and points at the new guy. Next, we see a lonely looking man sitting in his room when a woman escorts him to his scheduled massage. He enters the room and sees the massage therapist, who is pretty weird looking. He's shirtless with black tights and long spiny fingers. Kind of looks like a Smiling Friends character or something. He has the man lay down and talks about how important it is to stretch first and limbers up in a series of weird poses before beginning the massage. It's uncomfortable to watch as his long deformed fingers press into the man's back. He then applies a face mask, and one thing I like about this comic is that on paper there's nothing weird about this scenario, but it's just slightly off in a couple of different ways, which really puts a chill down your spine. The man thanks him and the massage therapist seems happy with himself for a job well done. However, he looks at himself in the mirror and the smile fades. After giving a few more massages, he sees some of his coworkers chatting and asks them if they want to do something after work, but they blow him off. It's kind of sad, actually. Somewhere else in the facility, the blonde guy from the company retreat is lost and wandering through the spa. Strangely, he can't find another person, and many of the large rooms are empty. The water here is pretty dark as well. Finally, he stumbles upon an employee and asks for directions. She points him to hopefully the right place, and he continues on his search. This employee was actually taking a lunch order to the VIP suite, and she enters to find him wearing a face mask and doing some exercises. I can't help but think of the opening scene of American Psycho and Patrick Bateman's morning routine. He takes one look at the meal that she brought and calls it inadequate, saying everything he consumes must be first class, and he sends it back. The woman brings it to the kitchen and dumps it into the garbage, telling the chef to get his shit together. The chef watches her trash the meal he worked so hard on and begins to shed a tear. Now that's just funny. There's a quick panel of the spa stairwell, which has a black fungus growing on it. Then we get back to the new guy who's been called into the director's office. The director says he's gotten some complaints about cleanliness and goes on a bit of a tangent. It quickly shifts from chastising the new guy over the dirty shirt to talking talking about what makes a good leader. The director clearly likes to toot his own horn. He then proceeds to tell a story of how he became director, which we see in a detailed flashback. He's a little boy playing on the beach when suddenly a bird is shot out of the sky, its body falling in a gory mess. We see the culprits, and it seems to be the cartoon-faced thugs from the opening. They hold up the bloody bird and smile as its entrails fall onto their faces. Okay. The kid pays no mind and keeps building a sandcastle while his father, a disheveled drunk, rambles about how he made his first million. He gets up to show his son some sandcastle tips, but trips and falls, destroying it. Soon, someone calls for the father to return to the spa for a board meeting. On the drive back, he says he's tired of being director and decides to hand the position over to his son. The boy says that he'll do his best, and we see his face shift into the adult version, bringing us back to the present. Apparently, that was the last time he ever spoke to his father. He segues poorly into talking about how the lesson is that employees should always wear clean uniforms. He then tells the new guy that his coworkers are waiting for him back in the conference room for a team building exercise. When the new guy arrives, he finds a chair sitting in the center of the room and several employees standing around it ominously. He sits in the chair and the director's assistant places a pig nose on him. She then tells the others to start the exercise and continue for 30 minutes. They'll lean over him making pig noises and oinking. Jesus, talk about a humiliation ritual. We see some more images of the various spa rooms as the black mold continues to spread and the employees are none the wiser. In one instance, a hotel guest spots an unusual looking person being escorted down a hall. They follow out of curiosity, and when they get a better look, the person's face seems to be missing and their skin has a strange texture. It's a spooky sight, and this is not the last time we'll see this faceless entity. We see the director pacing around, trying to remember what he was supposed to be doing when he gets distracted by a painting of a ski slope. He looks at it and sees a little cartoon character appear on top. They ski down the slope and meet with two friends at the bottom. It's a cute little scenario, but you might notice that these three characters resemble the thugs that beat the man to death at the beginning and shot the bird on the beach. Weird. His imagination is interrupted by his assistant, who informs him they have a small bookkeeping problem. She takes him to the spa safe where all the cash has been rotted by the black mold. All of the company's money is destroyed. The director says it's a shame, but he's an expert problem solver and can figure it out. The assistant asks what they're going to do about the inspection fees, but the director again says he'll take care of it. We check back in with the couple from the opening who comment about the unusual nature of one of the spa's areas. The water is black and there's strange, hellish plant life growing up everywhere. One of the staff members points them to a mineral bath nearby. While the ceiling above is covered in the substance, the bath itself seems fairly unaffected, so the couple relax in the water. This is the good life. Soon they both look over, however, and find the rotted corpse of yet another guest at the end of the bath. It's a ghastly image, and even creepier, the dead woman's hand slowly raises up and points at them. The couple just pauses for a second and then says, maybe we should have a sauna instead. Okay, well, maybe these weird human husks aren't exactly dead. I really don't know, but that's the first time we've seen one move. It then cuts to the couple in the sauna with no emotion like usual, although they're sitting next to yet another body. This one's face is torn off and neatly sitting on a towel nearby. My God. The man asks, have we done something wrong? And his wife replies, maybe we have. Okay, so they seem to have some acknowledgement of what's happening, but it's really hard to tell if they're seeing what we're seeing. In the break room, the massage therapist looks a little sad as he listens to the other staff members talking about how much fun they had on a night out. Soon, the new guy walks in, still wearing the pig snout. A couple of his coworkers apologize for being so hard on him, but that's just how things work around here. They smile at him, and in the hallway behind, he can see a person with a bizarre pig head peeking out. It's holding a coffee mug much like him. It's hard to tell if this is an actual entity he's seeing or just a reflection of how he feels wearing the snout. In this comic, it's probably both. The substance continues to spread across the facility, and in the showers, a cleaner tries to get things spotless when she's approached by the technicians. They are interesting to say the least. They're identical twins and have straight up cartoon faces, though these are notably different than the three cartoon figures that the director has seen. They get to work right away, pulling off a wall panel panel to reveal an elaborate set of pipes. They pull out a schematic and it's crazy complicated, might as well be for alien technology. The technicians go through their tools and it straight up turns into a Three Stooges style comedy act where one of them accidentally bashes their own head with a mallet, followed by the other doing the same thing. It's almost a nice break from the pure dread that is this comic, but these handymen are so damn creepy, so you can never really let your guard down. Well, next they use the mallet to straight up smash the pipes open for some reason, and the black gunk comes spraying out. They continue trying to fix the problem, but the results are disastrous. Eventually they are waist deep in the floor with pipes broken and strewn about the room. Next we see a guest coming out of a bath that is drenched in the black stuff. As she exits, it's clear that she's formed strange boils on her forearm. Elsewhere, the blonde guy is still lost and wandering around, now regretting leaving his colleagues. He happens upon his boss and asks if he's seen the others, but the man just smiles at him and then straight up walks through a wall. What the hell? The blonde guy says, "That was weird. He didn't even say hi. He's usually so talkative." Right, that's the weird part. He continues walking when someone approaches him from behind. And who is it but him? Or at least someone who looks exactly like him. The only difference being that the doppelganger's eyes are a little googly. He just looks pissed off and punches his clone in the stomach before walking away. What the fuck is going on here? We check in with the other company employees and see the weird looking guy who keeps calling everyone losers. He can't find his buddies and tracks them down to a mysterious room. And a massive gangly fingered arm reaches out, grabbing the guy by the head and pulling him inside, crushing his face in the process. Like usual, the others just smile like nothing happened. Then we see some more images of the spa as the substance spreads, only this time things are more overtly messed up. In one image we see some creepy guests staring at us, and in the background a skeleton lays on the floor. The next panel is the most frightening abomination yet. The torso of a guest has transformed into something straight out of Resident Evil. Between its protruding ribs we can see dozens of faces gnashing their teeth. All this atop unusually long legs covered in boils. In the next image, a guest has turned into a long slug-like creature, though we can't see their face. Things have definitely taken a hard turn. We then see the new guy sitting alone in his room with the pig snout still on his face. His walls are covered in the black mold. He suddenly begins hearing pig noises coming from behind his dresser. He slowly moves it and finds a hole in the wall. Inside is a disturbing sight. Real pigs screaming amongst the black liquid and strange fungus. The guy reaches in and rescues the pigs from the hole. He looks down and smiles at them. And what happens next is batshit crazy. We get a fairly normal shot of a hallway, and then suddenly dozens of deformed humanoid pig beings come flowing out covered in black filth. It's one of the most disturbing panels I've seen in recent memory, as more and more pour out in a grotesque circus of deformed anatomy. The new guy is in the middle, riding on top of one of the biggest pigs. There is a lot to look at in this image alone. Some of the pigs look like cartoon characters, while others are disturbingly realistic, and there's a lot of weird shit going on, like this woman with a pig head who has pigs as breasts. I mean, what the hell am I reading? We then get another glimpse of a random spa room. The guests casually stare in the corner where a giant floating head comes out of the ground. We then see three guys sitting in a sauna. One of them says, "You know, I've been thinking." It zooms out to show the three guys again, only the room is covered in black filth and one of them has boils all over him. He pauses and says, "Nothing specific." It zooms out again and things have progressed severely. The man with boils' face is gone and the room is completely full of fungus. Soon the strange material bursts out of the guy's head and closes in on the other two, who just sit calmly. The man says that he can get a little anxious sometimes, and the other man asks, anxious about what? They just stare at the pure body horror in front of them, and the man responds, "Nah, it's nothing, never mind." I mean, talk about denial. It's actually kind of comical, the lack of concern here. Next, we see the VIP guest laying on the floor with a hatchet in his back. It seems the chef didn't like the remarks he made about his cooking and in a rage killed the man. He sits on the floor by the tanned corpse in a panicked sweat for a moment before hatching a plan. He's already got darker skin, so he dyes his hair blonde and shaves his mustache in order to assume the VIP's identity. He actually already has basically the same face shape as the VIP guest. There's a running theme in this comic with alter egos and misplaced identity, but we'll talk talk about that later. The chef then wraps up the corpse along with his chef uniform and throws it into a large body of water. It's unclear exactly where this is, so it could be somewhere outside or in one of the pools. Just after he disposes of the body, the director spots the chef and believes that it is the VIP guest. He apologizes for the food not being up to snuff. The chef says it was only a misunderstanding and that the food was excellent. He then rushes off, saying he needs to check out immediately. The director looks over and sees a trail of black sludge leading down a hallway. He turns the corner to find that it is eerily dark and a figure stands in the hall. The director starts yelling at the mystery person about making such a mess. Then they turn their head and we see that it's the man in the pig snout. His eyes are now black and he just gives a menacing stare. Well, the director isn't fazed and continues to berate him when suddenly the room is filled with the humanoid pigs in all their body horror glory. They begin to surround the director in a haunting display of unsettling insanity. The director stays calm and looks a little puzzled by the whole ordeal. The man in the pig snout says nothing and just continues past the director with his army of pigs. The director just sits on one of the lounge chairs as the room around him fills with filth and fungus. He feels like the only one around here who truly cares about good service and quality. He looks over at a painting on the wall of a tree and has yet another daydream. The three cartoon characters wander through the woods picking berries when they're approached by a bear. Instead of attacking them, it eats some of their berries and befriends them. He's snapped out of this by the two property inspectors from earlier. They complain that the latest payment was less than usual. The director tries to explain that there was a small financial mishap, but the police officer picks up a vase and smashes it on the ground, while the other man says when payments are late, there are consequences. The officer then picks the director up and straight up yeets him into the wall. The way this is illustrated just looks really funny. It made me laugh out loud the first time I saw it. The man says they'd appreciate it if they get all the money next time. The director lay with blood running from his nose. His assistant runs to help him and once again contemplates telling him how she feels. But he rushes off and runs into the two technicians telling them to get back to work. There's another montage of the various spa areas. In one, a guest pours some champagne while their head has completely transformed into a demonic pig. In another, an old man rests in a hot tub with his eyes closed while three amorphous entities move in on him, their heads elongated and bodies decayed. One image shows some guests enjoying a soak in a pool while a massive entity sits next to them. Its body is bloated and head stretched out. Then, in one of the strangest and in some ways funniest images in this book, we see a corpse laying on the ground with its face torn off, the black liquid pouring onto the floor. Okay, that's actually really dark. That's not the funny part. There's a small skull-like head poking out of the guy's butt for some reason. It's another moment that was so bizarre I couldn't help but laugh. We see the chef packing up and getting ready to leave the spa when he opens his room door to find the VIP guest alive and wearing the chef's outfit. He's also wet and holding the cleaver. I guess he somehow survived. It cuts to another random spa image. This one may be my favorite. A bunch of swimmers are lounging by the side of the pool and staring above it where a giant disembodied head floats screaming. I love the contrast here. It looks really cool. The blonde guy is still lost in the spa and now he has some boils growing on his face. He sees what looks like the couple from the opening, only their faces are messed up. Their eyes are missing and their mouths are all dried out. They get closer and their faces are actually fine. It must have just been the lighting. He asks them what time it is and they say they have no idea and walk away. The blonde guy yells after them, telling them they don't have to act so stuck up. He says he should probably get some ointment for his rash. Then he encounters the doppelganger again, only this time it's him as an old man with a beard. He just ignores it and starts to walk away when he is suddenly shot by a harpoon which pierces him through the side. I can't say I expected that. A woman comes up holding a harpoon gun and just says, "Oh, sorry, I thought you were someone else," and then walks away as if it was a minor incident. The guy just says, "No worries, accidents happen," and says he'll be fine, it's nothing serious. Meanwhile, the harpoon is sticking out of his back and his robe is soaked in blood. It then cuts to a guest walking through the halls when suddenly the weird guy who calls everyone a loser appears. The long hand is still grasping his throat, and now he's holding two people of his own by the neck. They reach for the man and we get a cool wide shot of basically an infinite line of people choking each other. It's visually a really cool idea. Reminds me of something you'd see in Junji Ito. We see the couple laying in bed while a ghastly face floats in the blackness outside their window. They look at each other and start kissing while an even more disturbing entity walks by. The couple then start having sex under the covers, a pretty awkward exchange considering freaky ass entities keep looking in through the window. In a truly bizarre sequence, the couple is replaced by distorted monstrosities continuing the act, and the real couple standing naked is now watching them through the window. Then they suddenly have the robes back on and are standing by the bed, and the two human husks lay there motionless. It then shifts back to the couple laying in the bed and two ghoulish monsters embracing each other on the other side of the window. Soon the faceless figure from earlier approaches them, and we see them snatched out of the room through the window. Are you confused? I sure as hell am. We get another few images of the spa. In one, a girl stands calmly staring at the reader, and behind her is a massive human head filling up the hallway. In another, the two technicians simply shrug at us with the showers completely destroyed behind them. There's also a strange page featuring the director staring into one of the pools at a version of himself swimming in the black water. Next, the assistant seems to be wrapping up another team building exercise. This time, an employee stands in a corner wearing a dunce cap. Not clear what just went down, but I'm sure it was unpleasant and cruel. The assistant spots the director and tells him there's been some major issues, that the staff lacks discipline and several guests have asked for their money back. Funny enough, she doesn't mention the cosmic horror abominations that have taken over the place. He says that he just needs a moment in his office, and as they speak, they see a trail of black liquid and several of the pig creatures roaming the halls, the substance spewing from their snouts. We jump ahead to the director in his office, and the pig creatures are running rampant inside, although he doesn't react. Then his father from the flashback shows up. He tells his son that he regrets handing over the spa, and that certain situations require a real leader. He grabs the director's badge off of his shirt and puts it on himself. He says he's about to have a board meeting addressing all the issues going on and tells the son to pack his things up. While they speak, the office is being destroyed by the creatures. The father heads down the hallway and is confronted by the property inspectors, who start beating him up immediately. They tell him that they need to get the inspection fees. It's becoming clear that these guys are not inspectors but mobsters of some sort. The new director then pulls out a small horn and blows it. Elsewhere, there are several employees playing cards in a basement room, including everyone's favorite weirdo massage therapist. In the corner of the room sits a person in military garb and a beret. They almost look like a dog person or something. When they hear the sound of the horn, they stand up and grab two briefcases before leaving the room. He finds the director and the thugs and hands them the briefcases, which I guess hold his own personal money. The men then thank him for the understanding, and the director gets up and rushes towards his board meeting. One of the mobsters asks the dog person if they've worked here long, and after a moment of hesitation, they just say, "I'm not sure." The mobster doesn't even question it and just says, "Oh, that's just the way it is sometimes." It's yet another weird example of someone not quite understanding where they are or what exactly is happening. Checking back in with the blonde guy, he finally collapses on the ground, saying he just needs to rest for a while, as the harpoon still sticks out of his side. As he lay down to die, the three cartoon characters find him. They pull the harpoon out and then use magic to turn it into a flower. They hand him the flower and send him on his way. I mean, what the fuck? He keeps walking until finally, after all this time, he finds his room. When he enters, however, the room is black, and sitting inside is the man with the pig snout. After realizing the pig man looks sad, the blonde guy hands him his flower and he begins to shed some tears. As he cries, his deformed pig minions surround him, crying as well. Meanwhile, the new director makes it to his meeting and finishes his presentation. He asks if any of the board members have questions, but as we get a look at them, it's revealed that they are all corpses. Out of one of the body's eye sockets crawls a huge centipede. It looks up at the director and they stare at each other for a moment. Then we see that the centipede has a human-like skull for a head. In fact, it looks just like the creature that was sticking out of that guy's butt earlier. I also think it looks like a weird inverted version of the hungry caterpillar, but that might just be me. It grins at the director with soulless eyes and then suddenly jumps through his head, which explodes out the back along with his brains. That was a crazy turn, I have to say. Back at the basement card game, everyone realizes they don't know what game they're playing, but they're having a good time anyway, especially the massage guy, who's happy to finally be having some social contact with his coworkers. Then the new guy walks into the room. He's taken off the snout and his eyes are back to normal. He just says nothing and sits down, grabbing some cards. We check back in with the director, or rather the director's son, and he's daydreaming again about the cartoon characters. This time they're playing a game of mini golf and enjoying some ice cream. He's snapped out of the fantasy by the voice of his father calling to him from the dark hallway. Out of the pitch black, we can see his face, and it looks kinda corpse-like. He says the board decided it's best if his son continues as CEO. The son is thankful, but questions whether he even wants to come back. Maybe it's time to try something else. His father says he and the board have full faith in him. They have new capital, new investors, and business will will continue as usual. At this point, we can see the father's full body and his skin is shriveled like many of the dead folks we've seen. Close up in one of his eye sockets is the centipede creature. He pokes his head out and introduces himself as the new chairman of the board and that it's going to be great working with the director. Speaking of which, he places the director's badge back on him. He then tells him good luck and kisses him on the cheek. The director's eyes then turn white and he falls to the ground. We then see a flash of terrifying images of filth and body horror, with several abominations addressing the director. This continues on with even more frightening images and more creatures calling to him. In one image, we can see the director's eyes burning out of his head. Finally, his assistant finds him on the ground and asks if he's okay. When we fully come back to reality, the assistant is holding him in her arms, but his eyes are pure black and his skin looks burnt. Suddenly, the three cartoon characters show up in bathrobes and take the director's body. They whisper something in the assistant's ear, though we don't know what they say, and leave. This comic is beyond bizarre. Somewhere else in the spa, we see the woman with the harpoon has finally nailed her real target, a bizarre sea creature with 3 human heads. It's riddled with harpoons and several guests stand around it. Some of them seem to be mourning. The blonde man, clutching his wounded side, finds the exit to the spa. However, in order to reach it, he must enter a pool of water. He walks into it and finds a set of stairs going to the bottom. He walks down the steps under the black water, and along with him walk several other people who have transformed into corpses and creatures. And on a closer look, they all seem to resemble the blonde man in some aspect. They walk by a giant disturbing mermaid, and finally the man emerges alone on the other side and exits the spa. Next, in a very strange sequence, not that this whole comic isn't strange, we see an extravagant mansion and a maid with a tray of tea. The weird thing is, the maid looks off, almost like she's a corpse. She delivers the tea to none other than the couple from the beginning of the comic, only here they're super rich. They question how expensive this place is and how they're able to afford it. They finally conclude that they must be rich and famous, as if they aren't sure. The butler, who's a deformed creature as well, says that they have a guest, and the guest is actually familiar. It's the faceless person with the weird skin we saw way back near the beginning. He undoes his robe to reveal there's a strange face on his belly. The face then crawls out of his skin and forms its own body of a woman. The couple then asks if they've done something wrong. You may remember this is exactly what they asked while in the sauna upon seeing the corpse. Shockingly, the butler and maid both pull out handguns and shoot the couple in the head. Then the faceless man starts playing piano while the maid and butler dance. In the background, we can see the stomach woman grabbing the couple's feet and dragging them away. I should point out that the woman who crawled out of the stomach's face looks a lot like the centipede. Back at the spa, everything is being put back in order and their rooms are being cleaned. The director's assistant starts her day and grabs a handbell. She enters the reception area and finds the 2 technicians who say they've fixed it. One of them eats a banana and they start to walk away, but then slip on the banana peel, yet another classic slapstick gag. The assistant then walks down into the employees only area, and hidden in the walls are several hideous creatures tucked away, which she pays no mind to. She then encounters a deep well in the ground and rings the bell. On the beach, the director is laying in the sand. He looks over and sees the well, which extends up to a massive structure. He then looks back toward the beach where he finds the stomach woman who tells him to hurry up, a new workday is beginning, and the guests are waiting. Soon the director comes crawling out of the well, and the assistant gives him his schedule as he heads to his office. She once again wonders if she'll ever find the right moment to tell him how she feels, and he sits down in his office, which is now completely back in order. We finally get a full shot of the massive facility from the outside, and it's huge, almost endless. In the woodlands nearby, the blonde man walks away, pausing briefly to look back. As he travels, he encounters the 2 mobsters who are literally burning the money they got. Then he sees a limo roll up on the nearby road where a man gets out. It's the VIP guest, only this time it's clear that it's the chef with his dark hair and mustache. The man continues walking until he eventually encounters 3 thugs with cartoon faces, and they surround him with deadly weapons. It then cuts to the couple entering an eroded apartment building. They take the stairs up and see a smiling man with slick-backed hair and a bathrobe heading outside. You may recognize him as the very first person we saw in this comic who was attacked by the thugs. The couple acts as if they are interested in renting an apartment here. It's pretty run down, but they decide to head into an apartment and check it out. They face through the door, and outside the smiling man kneels down in the dirt, and that is Spa. ending just as it began. This may be the most surreal comic I've ever covered, including Beautiful Darkness, which was pretty vague in meaning as well. While Spa is a pretty obscure comic, there are still several theories floating around as to what it means. The most common interpretation is that Spa is a satire on the wellness industry. The spa becomes an allegory for how modern society pays for relaxation and self-care while ignoring deeper problems like corruption, alienation, decay, and existential dread that lay beneath the superficial treatments. This is the main takeaway I've seen in many of the reviews for Spa, but I want to give a bigger breakdown of all the major themes as well as my own possible interpretations. The biggest reoccurring theme, and in my opinion the most disturbing aspect of Spa, is the normalization of death and tragedy. Characters see rotting bodies, grotesque transformations, and violence, yet no one bats an eye, and they only act as if this is some minor inconvenience. As I mentioned, it really does remind me of what I found so creepy in Beautiful Darkness. Everyone going about their day to day as if nothing is wrong while major disturbing events happen. I think this kind of normalization of the absurd is terrifying, but kind of rare in media. Another theme is around identity. Characters seem to have no idea where they are or how long they've been there, and the main couple is a prime example. When they're in the shitty apartment, they wonder if they live there, and when they're in a mansion, they do the same, as well as taking a guess that they must be rich and famous. Not to mention the amount of bizarre doppelgangers seen throughout. Another big theme revolves around corporate rituals and power structures. The director's humiliation rituals like the pig snout and dunce cap, his succession story, and his father's eventual reappearance all parody workplace hierarchies. Even the inspection fees seem to be mob-like extortion disguised as corporate overhead. Also, the fact that the rules and status quo are more important to the business than addressing the madness that exceeds those boundaries. Then you have the fact that the story seems to loop, showcasing cycles of violence and surreal recurrence. The story begins with the three cartoon thugs attacking a man and ends with this exact scenario playing out again. The couple drifts from spa to mansion to the apartments on repeat, and the story loops back to its own beginning, suggesting an eternal cycle where horror endlessly plays out. Now, while these sophisticated sounding allegorical interpretations are interesting, I think it's a lot more fun to take a stab at this from a literal perspective. What if the spa is hell? Okay, now stay with me here, this is just for fun, but the endless spa could function as a sort of liminal zone, like the bathhouse in Spirited Away. People arrive without remembering who they are, whether they belong there, or even if they're alive. For example, this is why the couple can't decide if they live here, and why guests don't know how long they've been employed. This uncertainty of identity feels like the fog of death, or limbo. The black mold could represent the rot of death itself, slowly eroding both flesh and memory, eventually twisting bodies into new fucked up forms. This explains all the bizarre transformations. They're not random mutations, but stages of decay in hell. The cartoon thugs who appear at the beginning could represent demonic figures who oversee the cycle. They kill, escort, and reappear in the director's daydreams as if to remind him that this place is a machine of death. The director, in his obsession with clean uniforms and good service, is like a parody of divine judgment, where salvation isn't about morality, but about appearances. You could even take it further by looking at his father as an old god handing down eternal responsibility, the punishment being trapped forever in an endless, meaningless system. In this hell theory, the guest's indifference to corpses makes sense because they're already dead. The rotting husks are simply earlier versions of themselves, reminding them where they're headed. This is just how it works, and as the cycle repeats itself, it becomes routine. In this way, the spa is less a linear story and more of a circle of horrifying events where the dead enter, decay, and feed back into the cycle again and again. This is obviously more of a fun fan theory, but it does kind of work. Anyway, I want to know what you guys think of Spa. Is it a satire on the wellness industry? Could it be an interesting concept of hell or purgatory? Or is it just meaningless, a complete lack of narrative used as an excuse to showcase some cool horror art? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like this comic, be sure to pick up a copy at your local bookstore. Shout out to Kill Me Katie, as always, for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now. And if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grease speaking. Goodbye, friends. Carol Ann wanted a perfect wedding, a perfect husband, and a perfect family, but her desire to control the uncontrollable becomes her undoing. What starts off as a cute love story quickly turns into a body horror nightmare. As Carol Ann continues to hit setbacks on her way to a perfect life, she develops an unhealthy habit to deal with the stress. And as her life spirals into disarray, this form of relief turns into a sickening mutilation. Despite reading dozens of horror comics, even I found this one hard to stomach at times. Don't let the cute art style fool you. This comic is not for the faint of heart. This is tender. Hello friends, this is Grease speaking, and today we're looking at Tender by Beth Hetland. It's short and sweet, if by sweet you mean jam-packed with tragedy and cringeworthy body horror. This is another comic I kind of found by accident. I think I saw it mentioned on Reddit or something, and I was surprised to find that it hadn't gotten much attention, even for the disturbing aspects alone. Part of why I found this story so compelling and hard to put down is that it starts off so lighthearted and innocent. You think you're gonna get a typical slice of life, meet cute story, only to be pulled into a spiral of depravity and terror. The characters and situations feel real and touch on issues that people deal with every day, so when things are taken to the extreme, it's painfully visceral. I should warn you, Tender deals with some difficult subject matter as well as some pretty extreme gore at times, so fair warning, this one's a doozy. But without further ado, let's get into it. This is Tender Explained. Tender begins at the end of the story. A disheveled, scrawny woman sits alone in an apartment building, singing ominously to her pregnant belly. It's really off-putting for some reason, and trust me, it's actually way more disturbing than you could imagine once you get the full backstory. So let's jump backwards a bit. Carol Ann and her husband Lee are trying for a baby when the day finally comes that they get a positive pregnancy test. Carol Ann is ecstatic and can't stop watching the likes go up on her announcement post. We fast forward to the end of her pregnancy, and Carol Ann is happy to quit her job, anticipating the life of a stay-at-home mom. Her boss tries to convince her to come back after maternity leave, but she's got her mind set, and he congratulates her. Lee helps carry her things from the office as they take the train home. Along the way, Carol Ann points out all the things she's not going to miss about her daily commute. When they get back to their apartment, Lee asks what's for dinner, and Carol Ann picks up the cat before playfully declaring cat loaf. This seems like a fun little exchange, but it's actually really disturbing foreshadowing for what's to come. Carol Ann starts to make dinner, and while most of this comic is drawn in shades of blue, meat, flesh, and blood are shown red. The contrast makes even this steak look freaky. Now, up to this point, this comic seems like a wholesome slice of life until you get to this page, when we're hit with a nightmare scene. It's a mashup of images full of pain and destruction, like dilapidated buildings, a bug crawling out of another bug in a bloody mess, and worst of all, get ready to cringe, Carol Ann has a hangnail and starts pulling on it. Not only does it pull some of the skin from the end of her finger, she just keeps pulling until a long strip of skin tears off down her hand. These three images managed to freak me out more than most horror manga I've read. It's detailed and disgusting. Luckily, this is just a dream, and Carol Ann wakes up crying. Yeah, I would too. Lee comforts her before heading off to work and congratulates her on her first day as a stay-at-home mom. In a charming montage, Carol Ann does some cleaning and sets up the nursery, preparing the apartment for their new arrival. The days go by, and it starts to feel a little like Groundhog Day while Carol Ann waits for the baby. She stops for a moment and looks at her and Lee's wedding photo. This leads to a flashback where we learn how the couple met. Living alone, a younger Carol Ann scrolls through Instagram, envious of her friends who are all getting engaged, married, and having kids. She tells the cat that one day she'll have all of this too, and it won't just be the two of them anymore. At work, Carol Ann's co-worker Taylor makes fun of her for her strange lunch, where she buys multiple sandwiches and combines the different meats into a Frankenwich. Then, while she should be working, Carol Ann scrolls on Facebook and secretly prints some images off. Back at her apartment, we can see what she was up to, cutting the heads off of some marriage photos and replacing them with her and her office crush, Lee. I'm all for arts and crafts, but that's a little creepy. The next day, while she eats her monstrosity of a sandwich, Taylor brags about going out of town for the weekend with her boyfriend. Carol Ann notices Lee in the next room and zones out completely. At her desk, she writes his name over and over again like a high school girl. Turns out he works in the cubicle next to hers, and she waits patiently for him to leave so that she can accidentally run into him on the elevator. They exchange a glance, and Carol Ann blushes. Outside, it's raining heavily, and Carol Ann doesn't have an umbrella. Luckily, Lee does, does, and he walks her to the train, sharing his. They have a pleasant conversation up until Lee gets to a stop, and despite being soaked, Carol Ann is smiling ear to ear. Unfortunately, we're hit with another insane nightmare sequence. Once again, there are various disturbing images. Carol Ann is trapped in a cavern. She starts coughing and finds a clump of hair on her tongue. Then she pulls a massive fur ball out of her throat and spits it onto the ground in a puddle of blood. Jesus. At the same time, the cavern is filled with hair, and Carol Ann finds her shadow in a pool of water, which she smashes with a rock. We also see where the fur came from as she licks her cat furiously. In the final image, Carol Ann lay dead with her actual face smashed in with the rock that she threw. It's absolutely bizarre and terrifying, but it does a great job of feeling like a real nightmare. Carol Ann wakes up from this horror, and while real life isn't as disturbing, we do get kind of a creepy and sad sequence. After waking up, Carol Ann immediately scrolls on Instagram and afterwards looks at herself in the mirror saying congratulations over and over as if she's rehearsing it. Although as she does, she begins to cry. She continues this while she takes a shower, and it's really off-putting. Well, we find out why she's doing this at work. Apparently, when her office friend Taylor went off on that trip with her boyfriend, he proposed and Carol Ann was rehearsing her congratulations. It's clear that in reality, she's extremely envious. As she walks back to her cubicle, she begins to bite her nail until it tears off, leaving her finger bloody. Then, it's pretty gross, but she chews on the nail and swallows it. After her shift, Carol Ann runs into Lee in the elevator again, and it seems like he's just as into her as she is him. Before they leave the building, Lee nervously asks her if she'd like to get a drink sometime, and they exchange numbers. Jumping ahead, it's date night, and Carol Ann puts on her best lipstick and black dress. Dinner with Lee goes really well. They hit it off and afterwards go on a romantic walk, eventually ending up back at Carol Ann's place. They hook up, and then there's kind of a creepy shot of Carol Ann just standing naked by the bed staring at Lee, Paranormal Activity style. After a few dates, Carol Ann and Lee are officially an item. At lunch, Taylor can't stop talking about the upcoming wedding, and you can tell it bothers Carol Ann as she breaks her sandwich up into small pieces. The months go on, and in a montage we can see the progression of Carol Ann and Lee's relationship through the seasons until finally the day of Taylor's wedding comes. After the bride and groom's first dance, the floor opens up. While they dance, Carol Ann won't stop staring at the bride and making comments about how happy she looks and that she should be so lucky. It's a little pointed, and Lee gets annoyed, walking off the dance floor to have a drink. Carol Ann is pissed and chastises him for ditching her in front of everyone. They get into a big fight while the bride and groom cut the cake, and Lee wonders where this wedding obsession came from. Later in the bathroom, Carol Ann pulls on her hair out of frustration and, in a pretty gruesome sequence, rips a chunk of hair from the side of her head. Then, with skin still attached to the end of it, she puts it in her mouth. I rarely get close to gagging when reading comics, but for some reason this one really gets me. And trust me, it just keeps getting worse. It seems like Carol Ann has some sort of autophagia disorder, injuring and consuming parts of her own body to relieve stress. She comes back from the bathroom in a better mood and asks Lee if he wants to head back to her place. Back at home, Carol Ann sits in bed and starts pulling on the dry skin on her heel. Eventually, she peels some off, and it tears into her foot a little as we can see a dark bloody spot underneath. Lee comes back to bed and falls asleep while Carol Ann lays in the dark looking at Taylor's wedding photos on Instagram. She then quietly pulls the loose skin from her foot and starts eating it. Ugh. In another time jump, we see Carol Ann and Lee moving into an apartment together. Carol Ann gets dressed up for a brunch date with her girlfriends, and on the train ride over, she starts biting her finger again, giving her another gnarly hangnail. She shows up a little late and finds the girls a few drinks deep. Soon, the conversation turns to Taylor and how married life is. Carol Ann tunes out and looks down at her hand, imagining an engagement ring on her finger. Then she hides her steak knife in her pocket and heads off to the bathroom. We don't see exactly what happens other than blood going down the drain and Carol Ann clearly doing something with the knife. Yeah, I don't know if I want to see what she was doing. In another jump, it's now the night before Carol Ann and Lee's wedding. I guess he finally popped the question. After Lee goes to sleep, Carol Ann reaches into the back of the closet to grab the weird book she made all that time ago, where she glued her and Lee's heads onto a married couple. She takes it up to the roof of her building and burns it in a pot. It's a really creepy scene. Well, the wedding and reception go off without a hitch, and it truly is a perfect day. When they get back home, home, Carol Ann tells Lee to keep his jacket on. She wants to take some photos to post on Instagram so she can get that sweet dopamine hit she's been wishing for so long. We move ahead in the timeline quite a ways here, and let me warn you, this second half of Tinder is not for the faint of heart. At the hospital, it seems Carol Ann has just given birth to her baby, and the nurse leaves her and Lee for a moment alone. But something's off here. Lee looks mortified. Carol Ann says the baby is perfect and has his eyes, but he refuses to come over, saying he just can't do it. Carol Ann begs him with tears running down her cheeks, saying she needs her papa. At these words, Lee loses it and tells her that that is enough. You can tell he regrets raising his voice, and Carol Ann breaks down, saying she's still our baby. Lee tells her that it was their baby. If you hadn't put it together yet, it's a stillborn. The baby Carol Ann wants her husband to hold so badly is dead. Yeah, so not only does this comic have some gut-wrenching body horror, but it also has to throw this at us too. In another montage, the couple leave the hospital and try to move on with life. Lee slowly adjusts back to his normal self, while Carol Ann has a hard time getting out of utter depression. In another nightmare sequence, Carol Ann walks through a field. She looks down at her pregnant belly when it suddenly deflates and she begins to puke up a swarm of locusts. She wakes up early the next morning and makes some breakfast. It seems like she's actually in a pretty good mood. She wakes up Lee and says that it's been 90 days, so now they can start trying to get pregnant again. Lee is a little less than enthused on the proposition and asks if they can wait until after work. He heads off for the day and leaves Carol Ann to stew over his lackluster response. She starts cleaning the house in a pissed off mood and eventually makes dinner. There's kind of an eerie panel of her untying a questionable looking package of meat, and then she just stands still for an inordinate amount of time, once again reminding me of Paranormal Activity. Lee comes home from work and just tells her, "Let's be quick, I don't want to miss kickoff." Wow, what a charmer. As promised, Lee makes quick work of their lovemaking session and hurries off to watch football. Carol Ann drifts off to sleep and has another nightmare. She's running down a hallway chasing a bird. The bird won't stop running into walls, breaking its wing and causing blood to run from its beak until eventually it falls to the floor at her feet in a bloody mess of feathers. She wakes up in the middle of the night and makes her way into the kitchen, where she pulls the leftovers from the fridge and starts furiously eating the meat with her bare hands. Her cat stares at her while she does this, and she just gives it a dirty look as if she feels judged. The next day, Carol Ann says that they should try again tonight, and averting his eyes, Lee agrees. Once again, Carol Ann stands motionless in the apartment until it's late at night and Lee still hasn't come home, so she finally goes to sleep. Lee shows up and sneaks into bed, but Carol Ann's actually wide awake and asks him where he was. After a long silence, Lee says he doesn't want to do this anymore. If something went wrong, he just can't bear to go through it again. Carol Ann doesn't answer, and he thinks she must be sleeping, so she's wide awake and stewing over what he said. The next morning, Lee apologizes for coming home late and says that they could try again tonight, but Carol Ann angrily says there's no point, she's not ovulating. She gives him the cold shoulder as he heads out the door. It cuts to some unsettling images of Carol Ann using a meat grinder to make sausages, and the use of red coloring here makes it way creepier than it needs to be. Even weirder, she starts to eat some of the raw meat. Whoa. Later, Carol Ann stops at the store to pick up a pregnancy test, which comes back negative. She looks down at the results and then eerily looks into the bathroom mirror, faking a smile as tears roll down her cheeks. Lee comes home and Carol Ann presents a delicious looking dinner, but Lee says that they need to talk. He sits her down and tells her that he's been privately seeing a therapist and says that he knows she really wants to have another baby, but he just doesn't think he can after what they went through. He doesn't think he'll ever be able to. They both want different things, and he thinks ultimately this isn't going to work. So in a sad montage, we see Lee moving out and signing divorce papers, leaving Carol Ann alone with the cat, back to having none of the things she'd hoped for all those years ago. She feeds the cat some food, and watching it eat the meat for some reason pisses her off. She picks up the cat and starts petting it. Tears well up in her eyes and she starts to look angry. At the same time, she starts getting a little too aggressive with the cat, petting it way too hard. Some time passes and Carol Ann sits in silence in the living room. A fly buzzes by her and she smashes it before putting it in her mouth and eating it. We can also see that her hand has band-aids all over it, and she has multiple tears around her fingers, likely from chewing on them. She gets a text from her group of gal pals who all want to meet up again, and we're hit with yet another nightmare sequence. This one is full of all kinds of weird and disturbing images that are kind of hard to explain. There's some smashed bugs, a dead baby bird, and some weird body horror, like Carol Ann's mouth fusing together, and eventually her ripping off her own face. There's a lot going on on here, and you could spend a while just examining these pages. At the get-together, the girls speculate on what's going on between Lee and Carol Ann before she shows up looking not so great. They're immediately taken aback by the multiple bandages covering her hands. Seems like things have escalated. She just tells them that she accidentally burnt her hand in the kitchen, and one of her friends is clearly skeptical, saying that they don't look like burns. But they change the subject and ask why they haven't heard from her in so long, clearly trying to bait her into telling them what happened with Lee. She gives in and says that this is as good a time as any to tell them she's pregnant. The girls congratulate her, except for the skeptical one, who senses that something might be wrong. She tells Carol Ann about her OBGYN and suggests that she go get it confirmed. Later, Carol Ann goes to the doctor her friend recommended. Despite claiming that she had several positive at-home pregnancy tests and not having a menstruation period for 3 months, the doctor regretfully informs her that she isn't pregnant. She says that she'd like to do some more tests because the missing menstruation may be a signal from her body that something is really wrong. Carol Ann anxiously bites her fingers over the news and heads back home. When she gets there, she opens up a drawer full of pregnancy tests, all of which are negative. But Carol Ann gets out a Sharpie and starts marking the lines, changing them to positive obsessively. So Carol Ann never had a positive test to begin with, and this confirms that she is completely delusional. She makes herself dinner by heating up a strange-looking slab of meat with a slice of cheese on top. And as she bites it, there's a weird crunching noise, and she keeps reaching in her mouth to pull something out. At the same time, her friend calls her, and Carol Ann tells her that the doctor confirmed it. She's 12 weeks pregnant. On her plate, we can see what she was pulling out of her mouth. It looks like small bits of bone or teeth or something. I don't know if this is her teeth or bones from something that she cooked up, but it's making my skin crawl, and I haven't seen the cat in a little while. Some time passes, and Carol Ann enters her apartment to find a surprise party waiting for her. Her friends put together a baby shower, and now that we can see her in the light, Carol Ann isn't looking too hot. She looks emaciated with sunken eyes and cheeks. However, she does look pregnant, which is confusing and a little disturbing at this point. The girls mention that they got in using a spare key Lee gave them ages ago, and they also wonder where her cat is. They haven't seen him around the apartment. Her friends are pretty concerned about her and urge her to eat something. Carol Ann just breaks down crying, and her friends try to comfort her. It's clear that they found out what happened with Lee and say fuck him. Looking at all the gifts, Carol Ann says that this is all way too much, but her friend Taylor says they really wanted to spoil this one. A demented Carol Ann gives her a look and says, "What do you mean this one?" instantly making the room quiet and awkward. And soon after, they all file out. As they leave, Carol Ann says she's so lucky that her firstborn will be so loved. As she comes back inside, her stomach growls, and she takes a bunch of pictures of the decorations to post online. She looks at one of the balloons and sees her reflection, which prompts her to violently squeeze it until it pops, and then she pops all the other balloons in succession. After cleaning up, Carol Ann walks into the kitchen and starts heating up a skillet. Then she walks into the bedroom and changes into a bathrobe. It's here that we see something truly awful. There are huge chunks of flesh missing from her legs. She places a chair in front of the stove and sits down. Then, in a truly horrifying and revolting scene, she then ties off one of her cut up legs to numb it, and using a kitchen knife, slices almost the entire back half of her leg off and plops it onto a plate. She then takes the hot cast iron skillet and uses it to cauterize the massive wound before placing it on the stove and cooking up her own flesh with butter. As she does, she pats her belly, telling herself to stay strong for the baby and trying not to lose consciousness. Next, she sits at the table and proceeds to eat her own leg. After finishing up the entire slab of bloody flesh, she looks down at her grotesque bulging stomach and asks if that was yummy, saying, "Mommy will always take care of you." She then sits in her rocking chair by the window and starts singing, bringing us back to the very first few panels and ending where we began. I have to say, I have covered a lot of horror comics and some pretty messed up stuff, but for some reason the body horror in Tinder makes me very squeamish. Maybe that's because for the most part, it feels very close to reality. It's easy to imagine it vividly, and it's just so visceral. I really didn't know what I was getting into with this one. I heard it had some horror elements, but I didn't expect the utter tragedy that would unfold. While it's pretty self-explanatory, it might be worth noting some of the themes here, like envy, expectation versus reality, and the harms of social media. Carol Ann, idealizes her perfect life of getting married and having children, but sometimes she tries to force this ideal onto reality and cares a lot about how she's perceived online and to her friends. One panel that I think subtly showcases her obsession with presentation is when she makes breakfast for Lee early in the morning and waits way too long with coffee in a mug until he walks around the corner. Also, she can paint the picturesque image of a wife grabbing her husband a cup of joe in the morning. Now, there's obviously nothing wrong with trying to realize your goals, but Carol Ann shuts down when the reality isn't matching the ideal. Societal expectations weigh very heavily on her. As a result, she carries around these shortcomings with resentment and stress that she relieves through autophagia. As the setbacks of life come one after another, reliance on this stress relief culminates in a sickening way. At least that's my take. Now, the hoity-toity analyzing of underlying themes is fun and all, but a more literal question is, what's wrong with her stomach at the end? I mean, she can't actually be pregnant, right? It implied that she ate the cat, but is that why it's bulging like that? Or is it just the fact that autocannibalism must be terrible for digestion? Anyway, what do you guys think? Were you as skeeved out as I was? Let me know in the comments, and please support the author Beth Hetland by picking up a copy of Tinder at your local bookstore or comic book shop. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now, and if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grease speaking. Goodbye, friends.